The Ministry archives hummed with the quiet energy of preserved magic, rows of floating scrolls and shimmering glass orbs casting pale blue light across the stone floor. Dust motes danced in the narrow beams filtering through high enchanted windows, and the silence was thick, broken only by the occasional rustle of parchment or the soft chime of a time-sensitive document resetting its seal. Hermione Granger adjusted the strap of her satchel, her boots clicking softly against the flagstones as she moved down aisle 9, restricted temporal artifacts. She was here to verify the integrity of several confiscated time manipulation relics, a routine task, or so she thought. She knelt beside a cracked hourglass suspended in stasis, its sands frozen mid-fall. The tag read, "Star seized from black market vendor, Nocturne Alley, suspected temporal echo amplifier." Star. She pulled out her wand, murmuring the diagnostic incantation. The air above the hourglass shimmered, and for a moment nothing happened. Then the temperature dropped, her breath thawed in front of her, and the hairs on the back of her neck stood on end. The hourglass trembled, though it was encased in anti-movement runes. A low metallic hum filled the space, like the groan of gears turning in a broken clock. Hermione stepped back, wand raised. A figure emerged from the distortion. It wasn't solid, not quite. It flickered, like a damaged memory, shifting between forms. A man, a woman, a child, all layered over one another. Its eyes, when it had them, were silver, depthless, filled with what looked like fractured time lines spiraling inward. It wore tattered robes that seemed stitched from moments. Fragments of sunlight, shadows of rain, the faint glow of candlelit rooms long forgotten. "You should not be here," the spirit whispered, though its mouth didn't move. The voice came from everywhere, and nowhere, echoing inside her skull. Hermione tightened her grip on her wand. "Who are you? How did you breach ministry wards?" The figure tilted its head, or perhaps its neck bent at an impossible angle. "You see me. That means it has begun." "What has begun?" "Star is marked. The thread frays. The clock breaks at the hour of no turning." Hermione's pulse quickened. "Who are you talking about?" The spirit drifted closer, and the air around it warped. She caught glimpses, flashes of scenes that made no sense. A courtyard bathed in winter light. A wand shattering in mid-air. A hand, pale, familiar, reaching out, then falling. "Draco Malfoy," the spirit said. The name spoken like a lament. "He dies in a moment that cannot be undone." Hermione froze. "That's impossible. He's not even involved in this investigation." "He is Star, always Star involved," the spirit hissed. "The tether binds you. You will find the broken pieces. You will walk the paths that never were." "I don't understand." "No. Not yet." The figure raised a translucent hand, and Hermione saw her own face reflected in its palm, but older, weary, standing beside a man whose features were blurred, as if time refused to hold him. "But you will, when the mirror cracks, look not for truth, but for echoes." The hum intensified. The archives flickered, books rearranged themselves, the hourglass spun wildly despite its stasis field. The spirit's form began to unravel, threads of light peeling away into the air. "Wait," Hermione stepped forward. "What am I supposed to do?" The spirit's voice was fading, dissolving into static. "Find the first choice, the one you both forgot, or refused to make." And then it was gone. The temperature rose, the hum ceased, the hourglass stilled. The archives were silent once more, as if nothing had happened. Hermione stood there, heart pounding, breath uneven. She looked down at her hands, they were trembling. Draco Malfoy, marked for death. A moment that could not be undone. And somehow, she was part of it. She closed her eyes, trying to steady herself. But behind her lids, she still saw the echo of that hand falling. The air in the library had always carried the scent of parchment and dust, but tonight it tasted different, charged, like the moment before a storm breaks. Hermione sat hunched over an ancient tome bound in peeling leather, her fingers tracing the faded ink of a forgotten spell. The candle beside her flickered, casting long shadows that danced across the high shelves. She had been researching temporal anomalies for days, ever since the first time she saw it. The figure, translucent and trembling, standing at the edge of the restricted section. It had said nothing then, only watched. But tonight, it spoke. She had been reading about paradox echoes, residual imprints of choices unmade, when the temperature dropped. Her breath came out in a pale cloud. The candle flame bent sideways. There was no wind. And then, from the far end of the aisle, a whisper, thin as spider silk. "Draco." She froze. Not a shout, not a plea. Just a name, spoken in a voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. It echoed, not in a room, but inside her bones. "Draco," the spirit said again, clearer this time. Its form shimmered into view between two bookshelves, tall, blurred at the edges, its face shifting like smoke, eyes deep and sorrowful, locked onto hers. "He dies when the clock forgets to strike." Hermione stood, her chair scraping against the stone floor. "Who are you?" she demanded, voice steadier than she felt. "What do you mean he dies, Draco Malfoy?" The spirit didn't answer. It lifted a hand, pointing toward the window. Moonlight poured in, illuminating the courtyard below. There, barely visible through the glass, a figure in a dark cloak moved across the grounds. Draco, late again, always slipping through the halls like a secret. The spirit faded, leaving only a chill, and the echo of that single damning name. She should have gone to McGonagall, or Kingsley, someone in the ministry. A time-fractured spirit was not something to keep to oneself. It was dangerous, unpredictable. It could be a trick, a memory weapon, a remnant of dark magic left over from the war. But something stayed her hand. The look in the spirit's eyes. There had been no malice, only urgency, grief even, and the way it had said his name, not with hatred, but with the weight of inevitability. She closed the book slowly, her fingers lingering on the cover. The title, written in crumbling silver script, read, "Star Temporal Anchors, and the Weight of Unlived Lives." Star, what if this wasn't a threat? What if it was a warning? She crossed the library and peered out the window. Draco was nearly at the edge of the forbidden forest now, pausing as if he'd heard something. He turned, scanning the castle. For a heartbeat, she thought he saw her, but then he pulled his cloak tighter and vanished into the trees. Hermione hesitated only a moment before grabbing her scarf and cloak. She didn't understand what was happening, not really, but if the spirit had chosen to speak to her, if it had named Draco, then she was tied to this now, not as an auror, not as a rule follower, but as someone who had stared into the eyes of fate and seen a name written in the echo. She moved through the corridors with quiet purpose, her wand lit just enough to guide her steps. The castle seemed to hold its breath around her. Every creak of the floorboards, every distant drip of water from the pipes, felt like a clue. She reached the edge of the forest and stopped. Somewhere ahead, Draco was walking towards something he didn't know was coming. And somewhere in time, a clock was about to forget to strike. The late autumn wind whispered through the skeletal trees of the Malfoy estate, carrying with it the scent of damp earth and old stone. Hermione Granger pulled her cloak tighter around her shoulders as she stepped into the iron gates, their serpentine bars curling like frozen smoke beneath the bruised sky. The manor loomed ahead, its pale spires piercing the low-hanging clouds, windows dark and watchful. She had been summoned, not by owl, not by letter, but by a ministry directive stamped with the seal of the Department of Mysteries. Star Consultation on Residual Temporal Anomalies. Star, it had read. A cover, she suspected, for something far more personal. Draco Malfoy met her at the entrance, his posture rigid, his silver blonde hair catching the dull light like strands of quicksilver. He wore black, as always, but there was a new weariness in his eyes, something frayed at the edges. "Granger," he said, voice low. "I didn't think they'd actually send you. They thought I'd be impartial." She stepped inside, the heavy door clicking shut behind her. The air within was still, thick with the weight of centuries and secrets. Dust motes floated in the dim light filtering through stained glass. "And you? Did you expect someone else?" He didn't answer at first, merely turned and led her down the grand hall, past portraits that watched them with narrowed eyes. "I didn't expect anyone to take it seriously, but the wards have been twitching, like something's trying to push through." Hermione frowned. "Wards don't just twitch, Draco. Not unless they're reacting to something tangible." They reached the drawing room, where a fire sputtered in the hearth, despite the absence of fresh wood. The flames flickered an unnatural blue at the edges, and for a moment she thought she saw a shape within them, a face pale and translucent, mouth open, as if screaming. She blinked and it was gone. "Did you see that?" she asked quietly. "He didn't turn. I've seen worse." She studied him. There was a faint shimmer around his silhouette like heat rising from stone, but cold to the touch when she reached out instinctively. Her fingers recoiled, numb, tingling. "That shouldn't be possible," she murmured, pulling out her wand. "You're radiating residual chronomancy, like you've been touched by a time echo." "I haven't done anything," he said, but his voice wavered. "Not lately, not since the war." She circled him slowly, wand tracing a delicate arc through the air. Spells whispered from her lips. Detection charms, temporal diagnostics, layers of protection magic. Each one flared oddly, distorting as if passing through an invisible veil. "This isn't just an echo," she said. "It's anchored to you, like a tether, and it's growing stronger." A cold draft swept through the room, though the windows were sealed. The fire dimmed. Then in the corner the air rippled. A figure began to form, translucent and flickering. A man, or perhaps a boy, dressed in robes that belonged to no time she recognized. His eyes were wide, desperate, fixed on Draco. "Star, you don't have much time, Star," the spirit whispered, voice fractured like broken glass. "Star, the hour is set. The choice is made, but you, Star." His gaze shifted to Hermione. "Star, you can still change the shape of it." Star Draco staggered back. "It's been doing that. Appearing, whispering. I thought I was losing my mind." Hermione stepped forward, heart pounding. "Who are you?" The spirit didn't answer. Instead, it raised a hand, and in the air between them, an image formed, a clock tower. Its hands frozen at 12. Beneath it, a single word burned in silent fire. "Star, remember." "Star." Then it was gone. Silence settled, heavier between there. Draco exhaled, long and slow. "Now do you believe me?" She looked at him, looked past the arrogance, the old enmity, the polished mask. She saw fear, and beneath that, something raw, something real. "I believe you," she said, "but I think that spirit isn't just warning you. It's trying to lead us somewhere." He met her gaze, and for the first time there was no sneer, no deflection. "Then we'd better start following." The air in the library turned thick, like syrup poured over breath. Hermione's quill snapped in her fingers, ink splattering across her notes on temporal paradox theory. Across the table, Draco lifted his head sharply, his pale eyes narrowing. He hadn't spoken to her in days, not since the last time the spirit had come. But now his gaze locked onto something behind her, and his hand drifted toward his wand. "It's here," he said, voice low. She didn't need to turn. She felt it, the pressure behind her ears, the cold that didn't touch her skin, but sank into her bones. The candles flickered out, one by one, though no wind stirred the heavy velvet drapes. Shadows pooled unnaturally beneath the shelves, coalescing into a figure, tall, indistinct, wrapped in tattered robes that seemed stitched from smoke. Then the tether flared. It wasn't visible, not at first. It began as a vibration in Hermione's chest, a hum beneath her ribs. She gasped, clutching at her sternum, and saw Draco do the same. Then, between them, a thread of silver light sparked into existence, thin, trembling, stretching from her heart to his. It pulsed once, twice, in time with their ragged breaths. "No," Draco whispered. This wasn't part of the warning. The spirit stepped forward, and the world unraveled. They were no longer in the library. They stood on a battlefield, but not one Hermione recognized. Twisted towers of black stone speared a bruised sky, and the ground was carpeted in frost-burned grass. The air tasted of iron and burnt sugar. In the distance, two figures dueled atop a crumbling bridge, their movements blurred by speed. One wore a familiar coat, hers, but older, torn at the shoulder. The other, taller, hooded, moved with Draco's precise grace. "This isn't real," Hermione said, but her voice echoed as if spoken in a cavern. "It's a memory," the spirit intoned. Its voice was neither male nor female, but layered, like many speaking at once. "A path not taken. The choice undone." Draco staggered, pressing a hand to his temple. "I remember this. I don't remember this. You were supposed to fall," the spirit said. "On the bridge she reached for you. You refused her hand. Hermione turned to Draco. His face was pale, sweat glistening at his temples. I would never. You did, the spirit said, and time broke. The vision shifted. Now they stood in Malfoy Manor, except the walls were scorched, the floor cracked. A younger Draco, no older than 16, stood in the center of the room, wand outstretched, tears cutting tracks through the grime on his face. Opposite him, Bellatrix laughed, a knife glinting in her hand, and beside her, Hermione, bound, bleeding. This didn't happen, Draco breathed. I never. You hesitated, the spirit said, and she paid for it. Hermione reached for him instinctively, and the silver tether flared, searing hot. A jolt of emotion tore through her, not her own. Grief, guilt. A love so sharp it felt like a curse. Another shift. Snow fell in soft spirals. A quiet village nestled in a valley, a cottage with smoke curling from its chimney. Hermione, older, softer, sat by the fire reading. Draco stood in the doorway, watching her, his expression unguarded, peaceful. Then, lightning split the sky, a crack in the air. The spirit appeared, reaching. Draco stepped forward, intercepting it. A flash, silence. The cottage was empty. Hermione alone, clutching a locket. The vision shattered. They were back in the library, gasping on their knees. The silver thread between them still glowed faintly, humming like a plucked wire. Draco looked up, his gray eyes wide, raw. That future, the one with the snow. It could be ours, Hermione whispered. But it ends, he said. Every time it ends. The spirit loomed over them. The tether binds what time has sundered. You are not meant to walk alone. The moment of his death approaches, but it is not inevitable. Only if you remain apart. Hermione stared at the thread still linking them, pulsing gently. Then we stay together. Draco didn't pull away. He looked at her, really looked, and for the first time there was no mask. Then we find the moment, and we change it. The spirit bowed its head. Then the journey begins. Rain tapped against the glass of the abandoned classroom like hesitant fingers, each drop a whisper from a world outside time. Hermione stood with her back pressed to the cold stone wall, breath shallow, eyes fixed on the shimmering figure before them. It flickered like a candle in a draught, half there, half not, a silhouette woven from mist and fractured light. Draco stood a few paces away, arms crossed, jaw tight, but his fingers twitched at his sides, betraying the calm he tried to project. Again, Hermione said, voice barely above a whisper, show us again. The spirit tilted its head as if listening to a sound only it could hear. Then, with a soft hum that vibrated through the air like a plucked string, the room dissolved. They stood now in a corridor, familiar, yet wrong. The torches burned blue instead of gold, and the walls pulsed faintly, as though breathing. It was Hogwarts, but not their Hogwarts. The air tasted metallic, charged with something ancient and unspooled. Footsteps echoed, quick, panicked, then a shout. Draco. They turned a corner and saw him, older, eyes wild, robes torn at the shoulder. He was running, but not from something behind him. He was running towards someone, a woman with dark, wild hair, her back to them. She was on her knees, hands outstretched toward a small, crumpled shape on the floor. Elara, future Draco cried, dropping beside her. The woman turned. Hermione's breath caught. It was her, but not as she was now. This version of her had lines around her eyes, silver threaded through her hair, and grief carved into every line of her face. She looked up at Draco, her Draco, with a kind of devastation that hollowed her out. She's gone, she whispered. She's gone, and it's because of you. No, he said, voice breaking. No, I didn't know. I wouldn't have. You let the veil fall, she said, standing slowly. You chose the mission. You chose the war. You chose everything but her. I chose you, he said, reaching for her. I always chose you. But she stepped back. Then why is she dead? The seam fractured. They were back in the classroom, gasping, hearts pounding. Rain still fell. The spirit hovered silent. Draco ran a hand through his hair, fingers trembling. What? What was that? A future, Hermione said, voice hollow. Or a possibility. A thread that could be. Elara, that was our daughter. Draco stared at her. We don't have a daughter. Not yet, she said. But we might. And if we do, she dies. Because of you. Because of me, he snapped, turning on her. She blamed me, not us, me. Because you made a choice, the spirit said. Its first words, soft and layered, like echoes stacked upon echoes. And the veil fell. What veil? Hermione demanded. What choice? Tell us. But the spirit only drifted backward, fading. Seek the third bell. Before the hand still. Then it was gone. Draco exhaled sharply, pressing his palms against the wall, as if to steady himself. That wasn't real. It felt real, Hermione said quietly. Too real. The air, the light, her voice. That was me, Draco. And that was grief. He looked at her then, really looked. Not with the old sneer, not with distrust, but with something raw and unguarded. You think I'd let something happen to her? To you? I don't know, she admitted. But she believed you did. Silence stretched between them, thick with things unsaid. The rain slowed. A drop fell from the ceiling, splashing between them, like a period at the end of a sentence. Finally, Draco pushed off the wall. Then we find this bell. Whatever it is, before whatever happens. Hermione nodded, and we make sure the future never comes to pass. But as they stepped toward the door, she glanced back at the empty space where the spirit had been, and wondered if the future wasn't already reaching for them. The air in the abandoned corridor near the charms classroom shimmered like heat rising from stone, and then it wasn't empty anymore. Draco Malfoy froze, his breath catching in his throat. The figure stood with its back turned, translucent and flickering like candlelight seen through water. It wore a tattered version of a Hogwarts uniform, Slytherin, he noted with a chill, and its fingers twitched as if tracing invisible words in the air. He knew he should move, should draw his wand, should call for help, but his feet were rooted to the flagstones. Then it turned. Its face was a blur, shifting between features, sometimes sharp and pale like his own, sometimes softer, haunted. And yet, it spoke with a voice that seemed to come from everywhere, and nowhere at once. He dies in silence. The clock stops. You do nothing. The words echoed with a resonance that vibrated in Draco's bones. Find the hourglass beneath the roots. Before the second breath. And then, like mist torn by wind, it was gone. Draco staggered back, heart hammering. He had seen ghosts before. Nearly everyone at Hogwarts had. But this was different. It didn't linger. It didn't speak nonsense. Its star knew star something. And worse, he recognized the dread it stirred in him. The same cold weight that had settled in his chest the night his father had been taken to Azkaban. He found her in the library, of course. Hermione Granger, bent over a stack of crumbling tomes, her fingers smudging ink across a parchment filled with half-formed theories. She looked up as he approached, her quill pausing mid-sentence. There was no surprise in her eyes, only a weary understanding. You saw it too, she said. Draco didn't sit. He leaned against the table, arms crossed, voice low. Don't pretend we're on the same side, Granger. I don't trust your version of help. You don't have to trust me, she replied, closing the book with a soft thud. But you need to believe what you saw. That spirit, it's been coming to me for weeks. It speaks in riddles, but one thing is always the same. You die, and a moment that can't be changed, unless we change it first. He barked a humorless laugh. And you expect me to believe Star? Your Star the one to stop it? I don't expect you to believe anything, she said, meeting his gaze. But you saw it, you heard it, and now you're part of this, whether you like it or not. Silence stretched between them, thick with years of rivalry, suspicion, and words better left unspoken. Draco studied her, the tightness around her eyes, the way her fingers trembled slightly before she stilled them. She wasn't lying, not about this. Fine, he said at last, the word tasting like ash. But if we're doing this, it's on Star. Star Marn's terming. Hermione raised an eyebrow. Such as? No wand pointing. No spells unless absolutely necessary. And no telling Potter or Weasley. This stays between us. And in return? She asked. You listen when I say stop. If it feels wrong, if it feels like a trap, you don't push. And we follow the clues, not assumptions. She considered him for a long moment, then nodded. Agreed. Draco exhaled, the weight of the decision settling on his shoulders. Then tell me, what in Merlin's name is an hourglass beneath the roots? Hermione reached for a book bound in faded green leather. I think it's in the Forbidden Forest. There's an old willow near the edge of the lake, the Whomping Willow's ancestor, according to some texts. It's said to have grown over a time well, a place where timelines converge. Draco stared at her. You're joking. I wish I were. He ran a hand through his hair, silver blonde strands falling back into place. This is mad. Utterly mad. Yes, she said, a ghost of a smile touching her lips. But so was everything else we've survived. For the first time, he looked at her not as an enemy, nor even as a rival, but as someone who had walked through fire and come out scarred, but still standing. And in that moment, something fragile, something new, sparked between them. Not friendship, not yet, but the possibility of trust. All right, Granger, he said quietly. Let's go find your cursed hourglass. The fire in the Gryffindor common room crackled low, casting long, trembling shadows across the spines of ancient tomes stacked precariously on the rug. Hermione's fingers traced the brittle edge of a parchment dated 1347. Its ink faded to the color of dried tea. She'd been up for hours, poring over records from the Department of Mystery's restricted archive, smuggled, of course, with a minor confundus charm, and a well-timed distraction courtesy of a conveniently misplaced dumb bomb in the corridor. The words whispered of anomalies. Ghost winds. Echoes walking backward. Men seen twice in the same hour, though one wore winter robes while the other bled from eyes that had witnessed summer's end. She rubbed her temples. The spirit had come again last night, flickering in the mirror above her wash basin, its form fractured like glass under pressure. It didn't speak in full sentences, but in pulses, each phrase layered over itself like echoes in a cavern. Star, he dies in silence. The hour cracks. You were never meant to see this. Star, then the image. Draco, pale and still, curled beneath a willow tree. She didn't recognize, its branches weeping silver leaves into a lake that reflected no sky. Hermione shivered. That wasn't the worst part. The worst was how real it felt. Not a dream, but a memory that had somehow slipped through time and lodged itself in her bones. She turned a page. A diagram unfolded in delicate ink. A spiral of intersecting timelines, each thread frayed at certain points. Beneath it, the scribe had written, Star, when the soul is tethered beyond death's gate, it may waft the rifts. Places where choice forks and time forgets itself. Such beings do not speak for truth, but for desire. Beware the guide who remembers you before you were born. Star. A knock at the portrait hole startled her. She fumbled to cover the parchment with a charms textbook. Come in. Draco stepped through, shutters hunched as if bracing against an unseen weight. He looked exhausted, dark circles beneath his eyes, his hair uncharacteristically disheveled. You've been avoiding me, he said, voice low. I've been researching, and I've been seeing things too, he admitted. He didn't sit. Instead, he stared into the fire. A corridor in Hogwarts, but not ours. The stones were black, and the torches burned green. I heard my own voice, saying something I've never said, something about surrendering a name. Hermione's breath caught. What name? I don't know. That's the point. I couldn't understand it. It was like listening through water. He turned to her. You think it's the same rift the spirit came from? She nodded slowly. There were others, centuries ago. A monk in the Highlands claimed a future version of himself warned him not to bless the king. When he did anyway, the king died by dawn, of old age, though he was only 30. A seer in Prague vanished after writing one sentence. Star. The girl with moonlight in her hair will undo the undone. Star. Draco exhaled sharply. And you think that's you? I don't know. But these rifts, they're not random. They appear when timelines collide. When someone tries to change something that was never meant to be changed. She hesitated. Or when someone's star has star changed it, and time is trying to correct itself. He crossed the room in 3 strides, crouching beside her. So the spirit, it's not trying to save me, it's trying to fix a mistake. Or create one, she whispered. Their eyes met. In that moment, something shifted. not just understanding, but recognition, as if they'd both stepped into the same dream, and realized they'd been there together all along. Outside, the wind howled through the towers. Somewhere deep in the castle, a clock struck a chime that didn't belong. 12 notes when it should have been 9. Hermione reached for his hand without thinking. His fingers curled around hers, cold at first, then warming. "We need to find where the rifts are strongest," she said. "There's a pattern. I can feel it, like a pulse beneath the world." Draco didn't pull away. Then we follow it. And for the first time, the spirit's warning didn't feel like a sentence. It felt like a beginning. The air in the library snapped like a frayed wire. One moment Hermione was tracing a passage in an ancient grimoire, her fingers brushing the brittle page as Draco leaned over her shoulder, his breath a careful distance from her ear. The next, the world cracked open, not with sound but with absence. The silence swallowed everything. The rustle of parchment, the creak of old wood, even the steady rhythm of her own pulse. Then came the cold. It seeped through her robes like liquid shadow, pulling her under. She gasped, stumbling forward into a room that was not the library. High-arched windows framed a storm-lit sky, rain streaking the glass like tears. The scent of damp stone and old ink filled the air. Shelves still lined the walls, but these were crammed with Auror manuals, case files bound in black leather, and a wand lying abandoned on a desk, its tip still glowing faintly blue. Draco stood beside her, pale and wide-eyed, his hand instinctively reaching for his wand, only to find it gone. "This isn't Hogwarts," he whispered. "No," Hermione breathed, "but it is." A figure stepped from the shadows near the fireplace, tall, straight-backed, dressed in the deep green robes of a senior Auror. His hair was longer, tied back, and the thin scar ran from his temple to his jaw. But the eyes, pale gray, sharp with intelligence and something deeper, something worn, were unmistakable. Draco took a step back. "That's me." The older Draco didn't seem surprised to see them. He crossed the room slowly, his boots clicking against the stone, and stopped a few feet away. His gaze settled on Hermione. "You've come at last," he said, voice low, as if he'd been waiting years. "I felt the fracture, the same way I felt it the first time. And the 10th, Hermione's throat tightened. "What is this place?" "A memory that should have been," he said. "A life I chose, but never lived. One of many." Before she could respond, the rouge shimmered, like heat over stone. The walls bled into corridors, the storm outside melting into golden afternoon light. They stood now in a classroom, sunlight pooling on wooden desks. Students, familiar faces, but older, scribbled notes as a woman in deep burgundy robes wrote on the blackboard. Hermione froze. The woman turned. It was her. Older, a few silver threads woven through her chestnut hair, a warmth in her eyes that hadn't been there before. She wore a ring on her left hand, one Hermione didn't recognize. "Transfiguration," the older Hermione said, smiling faintly. "Today we begin with the theory of temporal displacement, not as myth, but as consequence." Draco looked at his younger self, then at her. "You're teaching." I'm here," she whispered. "We both are, just different." The spirit appeared then, not as a full figure, but as a ripple in the air, a distortion between seconds. Its voice came not through sound, but through memory, echoing inside their skulls. "Star, this is the first divergence. He became what he feared. You stayed, you taught, you loved. And still time broke." Star Draco clenched his jaw. "Why are we seeing this? Star, because choice is not a single thread. It is a web, and every step forward unravels another. Star." The classroom flickered. A scream tore through the air, distant, metallic. Alarms began to blare. The older Hermione turned sharply toward the door, wand already in hand. "They've breached the lower wards," she said, voice hard. Again, the older Draco, Auror Draco, appeared in the doorway, breathless, blood on his sleeve. "They're using time-slip charms. We're losing the timeline." Hermione's chest ached. "We're at war?" The spirit's presence thickened, pressing against them. "Star, you were, you always are. But this version fell because you refused to trust each other." Star Draco looked at her, really looked. Not with the old sneer, not with the wariness of years, but with something raw, uncertain. "We were supposed to work together," he said quietly. "And we didn't," Hermione finished. The vision shattered like glass. They fell back into the library, gasping cold sweat on their skin. The grimoire lay open before them, its pages now filled with new writing. Words that hadn't been there before. Star, the first truth, you must believe in each other. Before time will believe in you. Star. The candlelight flickered unevenly across the parchment, casting long, trembling shadows of the words Hermione had spent the last 3 hours copying. Her quill hovered above a line about celestial alignments during the winter solstice of 1891. A detail that, in their current timeline, had no known magical significance. But in the alternate record, she'd found hidden beneath a loose stone in the restricted section, it marked the moment the veil first cracked. "This can't be real," Draco murmured, his voice low, strained. He stood with his back to the wall, arms crossed, eyes scanning the same passage for the 5th time. "This timeline, it's like someone took our world and twisted it at the roots." Hermione exhaled slowly. "It's real enough. The dates line up. The names, the events, even the way magic was regulated after the Second War. In this version, the Ministry fell 5 years earlier. There was no rehabilitation of pure-blood families. No reconciliation. Just purges." Draco flinched. "And my father?" "In prison. Dementor's kiss, 1999. She didn't look up as she said it, but she felt the shift in him, the tightening of his jaw, the way his breath stilled. He moved closer, peering over her shoulder. "But I'm still alive in this version. I led a resistance from the ruins of Malfoy Manor." Her eyes lifted to meet his. "You died at 23, ambushed in the catacombs beneath Hogwarts. The spirit, the one who keeps appearing, was there. It carried your signet ring, said you gave it to them before the veil closed." A silence settled between them, thick with implications. The spirit had shown them fragments, flashes of cities made of glass and shadow, voices whispering in a language that sounded like time unraveling. Each vision ended the same. Draco, collapsing into a pool of silver light, while Hermione reached for him, and the world dissolved. She turned the page. Beneath a charcoal sketch of a circular altar etched with runes, no Hogwarts professor could translate, a single phrase was repeated in looping script. "Star, when blood meets starlight, the hour reopens." Star. Draco traced the words with a fingertip. "That's not Latin, or any tongue I've heard in the family grimoires." "No," Hermione said softly. "But I think it's Aramaic, or a corrupted form of it. There's a reference in Star, Magics of the Forgotten Dawn Star, an old text banned during the Inquisition. It speaks of a ritual meant to bind 2 souls across time, to create a bridge when the world fractures. And why would anyone bind Star us Star?" His voice held more curiosity than scorn now, the old defenses worn thin by exhaustion and something else. Something quieter, warmer. She hesitated, because we were close to discovering it before. In another life, or another choice. The spirit keeps showing us moments, versions of us that existed but were erased. A version where I stayed at Hogwarts instead of hunting Horcruxes. One where you defied your father at the Department of Mysteries. And we met there, he said, realization dawning. In those echoes, we were working together. There was a tower, silver, like frozen mist, and you were holding a shard of something that pulsed like a heartbeat. Hermione's breath caught. She hadn't told him about that vision. "The Chronos shard," she whispered. "It's not supposed to exist. It was destroyed centuries ago, after it caused a temporal collapse in Egypt. But it's real here," Draco said, tapping the sketch. "And it's not destroyed. It's waiting. And someone, or something, wants us to find it." Outside, the wind howled against the window panes, and for a moment, the candle guttered out completely. In the darkness, a faint shimmer appeared in the corner, the silhouette of the spirit, translucent and flickering like a broken memory, its eyes hollow and glowing, fixed on Hermione. Then, slowly, it raised a hand and pointed, not at the parchment, not at the book, but at the space between her and Draco, where their hands almost touched. And then it was gone. Hermione looked at Draco. His face was pale, but his gaze was steady. "It's not trying to save me," he said. "It's trying to reunite us." She didn't answer, but her fingers, trembling, brushed his. A spark, not magic, not memory, but something deeper, passed between them. The night air bit sharp against Hermione's cheeks as she stood atop the astronomy tower, her breath curling in pale wisps before vanishing into the dark. Above, the stars flickered uneasily, not with the steady constancy of celestial motion, but with a pulse, like veins beneath skin. She had first noticed it 3 nights ago. Orion's belt drifting westward, Cassiopeia tilted on its side, and now the sky was wrong in ways that made her stomach twist. She tightened her grip on the stone parapet, knuckles white. "This isn't possible," she whispered, more to herself than to the silence. A gust of wind rushed through the battlements, carrying with it the scent of damp earth and something else, ozone maybe, or the faint metallic tang of a storm that never broke. Then, a flicker in the corner of her vision. She turned slowly. The spirit stood 10 paces away, translucent and shimmering like mist caught in moonlight. Its form wavered, sometimes a man, sometimes a woman, sometimes neither, cloaked in tattered robes that seemed woven from starlight and shadow. Its eyes were voids, deep and knowing. "You see it too," it said, voice layered, as if many spoke at once. Hermione swallowed. "The constellations, they're moving. They shouldn't be able to do that." "No," the spirit agreed. "They should not, but time is fraying. The threads between moments are thinning. What you see above is only the echo." She turned back to the sky. An echo of what? Of what has already happened, of what might, of what must not. The spirit stepped closer, its feet not touching the stones. He is closer to the moment now. The tether tightens. Hermione's breath caught. "Draco. You're talking about Draco." The spirit inclined its head. "His death is not a single event. It is a convergence, a knot in time, and it is coming." She shook her head. "They followed every clue. The forgotten library in Hogsmeade, the mirror in the room of requirement, the words in the diary that hadn't been written yet. We've changed things. We've altered paths," the spirit interrupted. "But not the destination. Each choice branches, but some roots run deeper than others. His fate is anchored in something older than either of you understand." A cold dread settled in her chest. "Then what's the point? If it can't be undone, why show us any of this?" The spirit did not answer at once. Instead, it raised a spectral hand and pointed, not at her, but at the sky. Hermione followed the gesture. There, between the shifting stars, a new pattern emerged. Not one from any star chart, ancient or modern. It formed slowly, like ink bleeding through parchment, 3 sharp lines converging into a spiral, pulsing faintly, like a heartbeat. "That," the spirit said, "is the sign, the mark of the fracture. It appears where time stutters, first in dreams, then in mirrors, now in the heavens. When it is visible to all, it will be too late." Hermione's mind raced. "We have to warn someone. McGonagall, Kingsley, the Ministry." "No," the spirit said sharply. "They would not believe. And even if they did, their magic is bound to linear time. They cannot mend what is unraveling." "Then what do we do?" she asked, voice breaking. "We're not even sure what we're looking for." "You already know the path," the spirit whispered. "You have both walked it, though you do not remember. In timelines erased, in lives unlived, you stood together at the edge of this moment. You chose, and failed, and chose again." Hermione closed her eyes. Fragments of dreams, Draco reaching for her across a chasm of fire, his voice calling her name in a language she didn't know. A wedding ring on her finger that had never been placed there, flooded her mind. When she opened her eyes, the spirit was gone, but the constellation remained. That far below, in the dim glow of the castle grounds, a figure stepped from the shadows, pale hair catching the starlight, eyes fixed on the sky. Draco Malfoy looked up, and for the first time, he saw it too. The air in the Department of Mysteries was always still, but tonight it felt suffocated, like the silence had weight. Hermione's breath curled in front of her in silver wisps, the only movement in the long obsidian corridor. Her wand trembled slightly in her grip, not from fear, but from the hum beneath her skin, the echo of the spirit's last words. "Star, seek what was never spoken." Star. She had combed through ancient grimoires, cracked open arithmancy scrolls older than Hogwarts, and even dared to question a reluctant centaur in the Forbidden Forest. But it was only when she found the torn page, fragments of her prophecy etched in fading ink, with her name tangled beside Draco's, that she realized where she needed to go. The Hall of Prophecy loomed ahead, a cathedral of glass and shadow. Rows upon rows of crystal orbs stretched into darkness, each holding a voice from the past, a fate half told. The air smelled faintly of dust and something older, ozone maybe, or the residue of time itself fraying at the edges. Her shoes clicked softly against the stone, an intrusion in a place meant for silence. And then she saw it. Midway down row 57, nestled between prophecies about veiled wars and celestial alignments, was an orb unlike the others. It was darker, its surface not clear, but swirling with fog, the color of storm clouds. Etched into the base in delicate looping script were two names: Star, Hermione, Granger. Draco Lucius Malfoy, Star. She froze. No prophecy should have both their names. Prophecies were singular, personal, bound to one soul's path. This was a violation of every rule she'd ever studied. Her fingers hovered over it, hesitant. Touching a prophecy was forbidden, but she had stopped obeying rules the moment the spirit first appeared in her bedroom mirror, its face a shifting mosaic of Draco at different ages, some scarred, some smiling, all dead in one way or another. A whisper curled from the orb, not in words, but in sensation, a cold hand on her spine, the taste of iron on her tongue, the distant sound of a clock striking 13. She flinched but didn't pull away. "I wasn't sure you'd come," a voice said behind her. She spun, wand raised, heart hammering. Draco stood at the edge of the hall, silhouetted by the dim blue glow of the orbs. He wore no cloak, just a rumpled shirt and trousers, his hair disheveled, as if he'd been running, or hadn't slept. "How did you know I was here?" she asked, voice low. He stepped forward, eyes fixed on the orb. "I felt it, like a pull behind my ribs. Since yesterday. Like something's knitting us together, whether we like it or not." She studied his face, the shadows under his eyes, the tightness around his mouth. He looked like someone who had spent the night arguing with ghosts. "This shouldn't exist," she said, turning back to the orb. "Prophecies don't work like this. They're not shared." "Maybe it's not a prophecy," he said quietly. "Maybe it's a consequence." She glanced at him. "What do you mean?" He reached out, slowly, and stopped just short of touching the glass. "I've been dreaming, not of the future, of versions of me, other choices. One where I took your hand after the war, one where I stayed with my parents and vanished into the shadows, one where I died saving someone I didn't even know." He swallowed. "They all end with you in them, and they all end in fire." Hermione's breath caught. "The spirit said the same. That time is layered, that we've lived other lives we don't remember." Draco's hand finally touched the orb. The moment his skin met the glass, the hall erupted in sound. Dozens of nearby prophecies cracked open, voices overlapping in languages she didn't recognize, a chorus of warnings and weeping. The orb between them flared, a flash of green light, then red, then a blinding white. And then, from within, a voice, cold, ancient, and chillingly familiar, spoke. "Star, when the serpent drinks from the lion's cup, the tether will break. One shall remember all, the other shall be unmade. Star." The light vanished. The hall fell silent. The orb was now clear, empty, as if it had never held anything at all. Draco pulled his hand back, staring at his fingertips as if expecting blood. "That wasn't a prophecy," he whispered. "That was a sentence." Hermione looked at him, her pulse roaring in her ears. "No," she said. "It was a beginning." The air in the restricted section tasted like dust and forgotten spells, thick with the kind of silence that pressed against the eardrums. Hermione's fingers trembled as she traced the spine of the crumbling tome. Star Tempus Lamenta Star, its gold leaf title cracked and peeling. The book had not been there an hour ago. It had simply appeared on the lowest shelf, as if the library itself had exhaled it into existence. "Are you certain this is it?" Draco's voice cut through the stillness, low and edged with irritation. He stood just behind her, arms crossed, his pale hair catching the dim glow of the hovering lantern. He'd followed her, of course. He always did now, since the first apparition, since the spirit with Hermione's eyes, and his voice had whispered, "Star, he dies at the hour the prophecy breaks." Star, it's the only text listed in the Hogwarts archive that deals with temporal prophecy, and, Fracturing, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. The spirit mentioned a fractured guardian. This section references guardians of time who were torn across moments. It's possible. She cracked the cover. The pages resisted, brittle as old bone. A puff of silver dust spiraled into the air, catching the light like suspended stardust. Then, a hum, low and resonant, vibrating up through the floorboards. The book trembled in her hands. "No," Draco said, stepping forward. "Don't." Too late. The pages flared with sudden light. Not fire, but something colder. White gold like moonlight on ice. Words peeled themselves from the parchment, swirling upward in jagged fragments. They didn't float. They star-shattered star, like glass falling upward into the dark. Guardian. The guardian split by choice, unmade, star. Blood of the oath, breath of the Mai. Star. When twin shadows walk the ashen hall. Star. The serpent wears the lion's tear. Star. Only love unasked can mend the fracture. Oh. Star. Hermione staggered back, the book tumbling from her grasp. The words circled the room, some vanishing into the rafters, others burning briefly against the shelves before dissolving. One fragment, star, lion's tear star, drifted toward Draco, hovered near his chests, and then star sank star into his robes like a stone into water. He gasped, clutching at the fabric. What was that?" "I don't know," she whispered, but it felt like recognition. The lantern flickered. Shadows stretched too long, too sharp. Then from the corner where the book had fallen, a shimmer coalesced. A figure, half-translucent, flickering between forms. One moment it was a woman with wild curls and battle-worn robes. The next, a man with a Malfoy's sharp jaw and eyes full of sorrow. "Star, you were not meant to see this yet." "Star," the spirit whispered, its voice layered. Hermione's cadence, Draco's timbre, and something older beneath. "Star, but the fracture widens, the tether frays. Star." "Who are you?" Hermione demanded, heart-hammering. "When is the fractured guardian?" The spirit turned, and for a fleeting second its face was both of theirs, merged, seamless, heartbreakingly familiar. "Star, I am what remains, when time forgets its duty. I am the echo of a vow neither of you remember making. Star." Draco stepped forward, jaw tight. "And this prophecy, what does it want with us?" "Star." "Not prophecy, Star," the spirit corrected. "Star, memory. This was never a prediction, it was a warning, carved from what already happened, in another breath of time. Star." Silence fell, thick and suffocating. Hermione swallowed. "You're saying this future, your death, already occurred." The spirit looked at Draco, and its expression softened with unbearable grief. "Star, you died to save her. And she lived to forget you." Star. Draco flinched. "But we're here," Hermione said, voice rising. "We're alive. That timeline isn't." "Star, timelines bleed." "Star," the spirit interrupted. "Star, and the fracture grows. The prophecy unbound means the walls are thinning. You will see what was, you will feel what never should have been. And you must decide, again, who you are willing to lose." "Star." It began to fade, dissolving into motes of light. "Wait." Hermione reached out. "What does love unasked mean?" But the spirit was gone. Only the scent of ozone and old parchment remained. Draco exhaled slowly, his breath unsteady. "She said I died for you." Hermione met his gaze. "And I forgot you." They stood in the wreckage of a truth, too fragile to hold, the weight of unremembered love pressing between them like a third presence. The air in the Ministry of Magic tasted stale, thick with dust and the faint metallic tang of old spells. Hermione's boots echoed too loudly against the marble floor, each step swallowed by the unnerving silence that had settled over level 3. She paused, frowning, her fingers tightening around the scroll she'd just retrieved from the Department of Mysteries. It shouldn't be this quiet. Even late at night, the Ministry hummed, charms recasting, enchanted quills scratching, the distant murmur of night patrol. Then the walls breathed. A low groan shivered through the corridor, like stone stretching after centuries of stillness. Hermione spun, her wand already drawn. The torches flickered, their flames turning a sickly green before snapping back to gold. Beside her, the tapestry of historical goblin uprisings rippled, the woven figures blinking, turning their heads to stare directly at her. "Impossible," she whispered. The shout echoed from down the hall, sharp, familiar, laced with panic. "Granger!" Draco Malfoy rounded the corner, his robes disheveled, one sleeve singed. He skidded to a halt, chest heaving. "You saw that right. The lifts just vanished, like they were never there." Hermione nodded, her mind racing. Temporal displacement. Something's fractured the timeline. The architecture is reacting. Before Draco could respond, the corridor behind him twisted. The floor lifted like a wave, tiles peeling upward into the air, before folding back down in a new configuration. A doorway that hadn't been there moments ago yawned open, revealing a dark staircase spiraling downward. Draco cursed under his breath. "This is not happening." "It is," Hermione said, stepping forward. "And we need to move. The Ministry is reordering itself, rooms shifting, corridors collapsing. If we're caught in a fracture zone, we end up in a pocket dimension. Or worse, erased." He looked at her, eyes wide, but alert. "You actually know what's going on, don't you?" She hesitated. She'd seen the spirit 3 times now, pale, translucent, its voice, a fractured echo of someone she couldn't place. It always spoke of Draco. Star. He dies when the walls remember. Star. But she couldn't tell him that. "Not yet. I know enough," she said. "Stay close, and don't touch anything that looks wrong." They moved together down the newly formed staircase, the stone steps slick with condensation that smelled faintly of rain and burnt parchment. The air grew colder with each step, their breath forming ghostly trails. At the bottom, a circular chamber opened before them, its domed ceiling painted with constellations that didn't match the current sky. In the center stood a pedestal, and on it, a cracked hourglass filled not with sand but with shimmering silver mist. Drake approached it warily. "That's not Ministry's standard issue." "No," Hermione murmured, stepping closer. "That's a temporal anchor, or what's left of one. Someone tried to stabilize a timeline here, and failed." A whisper curled through the room, not from the air, but from the stones themselves. "Star. Find the thread. Before the hour breaks." "Star," Hermione gasped. She'd heard that voice before. The spirit. Draco turned to her. "Did you?" "Yes." She met his gaze. "There's something I haven't told you." He stared at her, then nodded slowly. "Let's hear it, but make it quick. I don't fancy being turned into a footnote in history." She took a breath. "There's a spirit appearing to me. It says you're going to die. In a moment that can't be undone. It's been leading us through signs, through memories that aren't ours. I think it's trying to change something, or prevent it." Draco went very still. "And you didn't think to mention this earlier." "I didn't know if I could trust it, or you." A wry smile tugged at his mouth. "Fair." The hourglass trembled. The silver mist inside swirled violently, then began to fall, not down, but upward. The walls around them pulsed, shadows stretching like living things. "Right," Draco said, rolling his shoulders. "So we find this thread. What now, Professor?" Hermione reached for his hand. "We remember what we've forgotten." And as their fingers intertwined, the room dissolved into light. Rain tapped a steady rhythm against the stone windows of the abandoned classroom, a quiet metronome to the tension between them. The temporal wards had sealed the door hours ago, unpredictable, like everything else since the spirit first appeared in the restricted section, its translucent form flickering with Draco's face, but aged, hollowed by sorrow. Now, trapped together beneath a ceiling that wept shadows, Hermione sat with her back against a dusty bookshelf, knees drawn to her chest. Draco paced, restless, his boots scuffing the cracked flagstones. "It's not supposed to feel like this," he said, more to the wall than to her. "Like I'm walking through my own life, and someone else wrote the lines." Hermione watched him. The candlelight caught the sharp planes of his face, the faint tremor in his hands when he ran them through his hair. "You think I don't know what that's like? Since the spirit came, I've dreamed of a war we never fought, places I've never been. I held a child once in one of those dreams. Your child. Our child. And I woke up crying because I could still feel her weight in my arms." Her voice cracked. She hadn't meant to say that, not out loud, not to him. Draco stopped, turned slowly. "A girl?" She nodded, not trusting her voice. He exhaled, slumping against the wall. I've seen it too. Just flashes. A house by a lake. You're laughing. I don't recognize the sound of my own voice when I answer. And then, always, the same moment, the sky splits open, something falls, and I'm gone. He looked at her, eyes raw. That's what the spirit shows me, not how I die. Just that I do, and you're always there, watching. The air thickened. Hermione hugged her knees tighter. Maybe it's not real, maybe it's just echoes, fragments of timelines that never were. But what if they were close? He asked. What if we almost got there? Then someone, or something, ripped it away. Silence stretched, filled only by the rain or the occasional groan of old wood. Then Hermione said softly, I'm afraid of forgetting. He frowned. Forgetting what? Everything. The way this feels. The way you look at me when you think I'm not watching. The way your voice changes when you're trying not to be cruel. I'm afraid that if we fix this, if we survive, none of it will matter. That we'll go back to who we were before, and I'll lose the version of you who brings me tea without asking. Who knows? I like my books alphabetized even in the middle of a crisis. Draco stared at her. Then, slowly he walked over and sat across from her, tucking one leg beneath him like he'd seen her do 100 times. I brought that tea because you were shivering, he said quietly, and I alphabetize my potion's ingredients. It's not some grand gesture, it's just how I am. But you noticed, she whispered. He looked down at his hands. I've noticed a lot of things I shouldn't have. Like how you bite your lip when you're trying not to cry, or how you hum when you're concentrating. Some muggle song I don't know, or how you still flinch when someone raises their voice, even if it's not aimed at you. He paused. I think I've been afraid of you since first year. She blinked. Afraid of me? Not of your spells, he said with a faint wry smile. Of how much you see, how much you care. It made me feel small, and then later, when the war came, and you stood there with blood on your face and fire in your eyes, defying people who have killed you without blinking, I was terrified, because I knew then that I would never be brave the way you are. Hermione reached out without thinking, her fingers brushing his wrist. You are brave, she said. You just show it differently. He looked at her hand, then into her eyes. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then, quietly, he turned his palm up, lacing his fingers with hers. Outside, the rain softened. The wards hummed, then flickered, just once, as if the world itself had paused to catch its breath. The corridor was too quiet, the kind of silence that pressed against the eardrums like water at the bottom of a lake. Hermione's wand trembled in her hand, its tip casting a narrow beam of blue-white light that cut through the dust-laden air. The Ministry's Department of Mysteries had always unsettled her, the weight of unseen knowledge, the hum of dormant spells beneath the stone, but this forgotten annex felt different, wrong. As if time itself had frayed at the edges, Draco walked a step behind, shoulders tense, his breath shallow. He hadn't spoken since they'd passed the rusted gate marked star, Section 9 archived chronology's star. She could feel his presence like a cold draft down the nape of her neck. They'd argued at first, of course, Draco insisting the spirit was a trick, a curse, aimed at them both. But the footprints had silenced him. They appeared just after midnight in the atrium, glowing faintly like frost on marble. 2 sets, one unmistakably hers, the other his. But the prince moved star into star the ministry, not out, backwards, as if they had walked from deep within the building and were now retreating into the past. This doesn't make sense, Draco muttered, his voice low, edged with something close to fear. We've never been here. I've never seen this place. Hermione crouched, brushing her fingers over one of the impressions. The stone was unnaturally cool, and the outline shimmered faintly under her touch, like oil on water. It's not just footprints, she whispered. Look at the stride, the angle. These aren't ours as we are. They're older, worn down. He knelt beside her, his silver blonde hair catching the dim white. You think it's us from another time, or another choice, she said. The spirit said we were bound by a tether. Maybe this is how it manifests. Echoes of paths we didn't take. A flicker of movement ahead. The corridor widened into a circular chamber, its walls lined with shattered hourglasses, their sand long since spilled into dark crystalline heaps. In the center stood a pedestal, black stone veined with silver, supporting a cracked mirror. The surface wasn't reflective. Instead it swirled with fog, like breath on glass in winter. And there, leading straight to it, were the footprints. Still glowing, still moving star backwards. Star, Draco, exhale hauptly. Draco exhaled sharply. That mirror. I've seen it before. Hermione turned to him startled. When? In a dream, or a memory I don't have. He stepped forward, against his better judgment. I was older. You were with me. We were arguing, about a choice, something about sacrifice. She followed, heart pounding in her throat. Maybe it's not a memory. Maybe it's a warning. As they approached, the mirror rippled. The fog thinned. For a single breath, they saw themselves, not as they were now, but aged, weary, standing in this same chamber. Hermione wore a torn cloak, her hair streaked with gray. Draco's face bore a scar that hadn't been there before, cutting from temple to jaw. Their hands were clasped tightly, as if holding on for dear life. Then the image fractured. A whisper tore through the air, not in any language, but in sensation. Regret, urgency, a name half-formed, Star Alara Star. The footprints at their feet began to fade. We're running out of time, Hermione said, voice trembling. Whatever this is, it's slipping away. Draco reached out, fingers nearly brushing the mirror. Why show us this? Why lead us here, only to vanish? Because we're not meant to see the end, she said softly. Only the path. He turned to her, his gray eyes searching hers. Then what happens if we follow it? She didn't answer. She couldn't. But when she took his hand, cold, hesitant, real, the footprints flared once more, brighter than before, and the mirror exhaled a single echoing word in a voice that was neither theirs nor entirely foreign. Star together. The air in the hidden chamber tasted ancient, like dust and dried parchment steeped in moonlight. Hermione's breath came shallow as she stepped forward, her wand trembling slightly in her grip. The stone door had groaned open only after Draco whispered a sequence of syllables in a language neither of them recognized, words that had slithered into his mind during one of the spirit's visits, spoken in that fractured, echoing voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Inside, the room defied time. Walls curved inward like the ribs of some long-dead beast, lined with shelves that held not books but glass orbs, hundreds of them, each pulsing with a soft internal light. Some glowed gold, others violet or deep emerald, swirling with mist that shifted like storm clouds. The floor was cracked marble, veined with silver threads that shimmered faintly, as though tracing forgotten constellations. This shouldn't exist, Hermione whispered, her fingers brushing the edge of a shelf. The moment she touched it, a sharp jolt ran up her arm, and one of the orbs flared. Images burst into the air between them. A younger Draco, no older than 16, stood in the great hall, his wand lowered, blood streaking his temple. Around him, students lay motionless. But it wasn't the Battle of Hogwarts. The banners were different. Slytherin green and silver hung everywhere, unchallenged. And Draco's face, it wasn't triumph. It was grief. Hermione gasped. That's not how it happened. Draco stared, his jaw tight. No, I didn't. Another orb flared. This time Hermione saw herself in the room of requirement. Robes torn, clutching a book bound in black iron. Tears streaked her cheeks. And Draco, older, weary, knelt beside her, whispering something she couldn't hear before pressing a hand to her chest. A golden thread pulsed between them, then snapped. The vision faded. They're memories, Hermione said, voice trembling. But not ours. These are other lives. Timelines, Draco corrected, stepping forward. His reflection warped in the surface of a nearby orb, older, bearded, wearing a silver insignia she didn't recognize. We made different choices. We lived different paths. And something, preserved them. A cold wind stirred though there was no window, no door, but the one they'd entered. The silver veins in the floor brightened, pulsing in rhythm with the orbs. Then the spirit appeared. It stood at the far end of the chamber, translucent and flickering, its form shifting, sometimes a boy, sometimes a man, sometimes neither. Its eyes were hollow, yet they fixed on Draco with unbearable weight. You see now, it said, voice layered with echoes. Every choice branches. Every loss leaves a scar in time. Hermione stepped forward. Why show us this? Why now? The spirit turned its head slowly. Because the thread that binds you, yours is the only path where he survives. But it is fraying. Draco's breath caught. So you're trying to save me? I am trying to make you understand, the spirit replied. You were never meant to walk this road alone. She is your anchor. Without her, time unravels. Hermione looked at Draco. Their eyes met, and for a moment, the weight of every near death, every cold word, every unspoken regret hung between them. One of the orbs cracked. A new vision spilled out. Hermione and Draco, older, standing on a hill beneath a sky split by two suns. They were holding hands, laughing, and behind them, a city rose from the earth, glowing with magic that pulsed like a heartbeat. That's impossible, Draco said. Is it? The spirit whispered. Or is it simply a future you've refused to imagine? The chamber trembled. Dust rained from the ceiling. The silver veins dimmed. We can't stay, Hermione said, reaching for Draco's arm. Not yet. But we will come back. Draco hesitated only a second before nodding. He glanced once more at the broken orb, the lingering image of their shared future fading like smoke, and as they stepped back through the stone door, the spirit's voice followed. Soft, almost kind. Remember what you saw. Not all endings are losses. Some are beginnings you've yet to choose. Rain tapped against the window pane of the abandoned classroom, a slow, insistent rhythm that blended with the hush of breath between them. Hermione stood frozen, her fingers still outstretched toward the shimmering air where the spirit had hovered moments before. Draco watched her, his usual sharpness dulled by something unfamiliar, concern, perhaps, or the creeping weight of inevitability. Then the air cracked, not with sound, but with sensation, a jagged tear in the fabric of perception. The room dissolved like ink in water, colors bleeding into shadow and form. Hermione gasped as the floor vanished beneath her feet, not into a fall, but into a shift. Her body still there, yet her mind pulled, wrenched forward into a moment that was not hers. Not yet. She stood in a garden, cloaked in twilight, the scent of damp earth, and dying roses thick in the air. Stone steps wound upward toward a house she didn't recognize, tall, Gothic arches softened by ivy, windows glowing with low candlelight. And there, kneeling on a moss-covered grave, was a woman. Hermione's breath caught. The woman's hair, though streaked with silver, was unmistakably hers, wild curls bound in a loose braid, fraying at the edges. Her robes were dark, simple, worn at the cuffs. Her hands trembled as they traced the name carved into the stone. Star Draco Abraxas Malfoy, beloved. Lost too soon. Star, a sob tore from Hermione's throat. Hers, but not hers. The future woman bowed her head, shoulders shaking, her voice a broken whisper. I tried every way, every spell, every memory, every thread of time. I pulled them all apart, but I couldn't save you. Hermione wanted to step forward, to comfort her, to scream that it wasn't real, but she was a ghost in this moment, down to witness. The wind stirred, lifting the older woman's hair, revealing the deep lines around her eyes, lines carved by grief, not age. You always said I'd be the death of you, she murmured, a broken laugh catching in her throat. But it was the other way around. You were the one who taught me how to live, and now I don't know how to do it without you. A locket lay open in her palm, a tiny portrait of Draco, not as he was now, smirking and guarded but softened, peaceful, loving. He looked at the camera with quiet devotion, as if the entire world existed, only in the space between him and the woman holding the locket. Hermione's chest ached. She had never seen Draco look at her like that. Not in this life. I keep thinking, the older Hermione whispered, if I had just trusted you sooner, if I hadn't fought every change, every shift, maybe the spirit wasn't warning me to save you. Maybe it was showing me what I'd lose if I didn't let go of who I thought we were supposed to be. A single tear fell onto the grave, vanishing into the moss. Then, a voice, Draco's, cut through the vision, sharp with panic. Granger, snap out of it. The garden shattered. Hermione stumbled back into her body with a gasp, collapsing to her knees on the cold stone floor. Her vision swam. Rain still fell. The spirit was gone. Draco crouched beside her, gripping her arms, his face pale beneath the dim light. "You were gone," he said, voice tight. "Your eyes, empty, like you weren't even here." She looked up at him, trembling, saw the fear in his eyes, not for himself but for her. "I saw you die," she whispered, "and I was alone. For years, decades, I was alone." Draco flinched but didn't let go. "It felt real," she continued, her voice breaking. "Not like a vision, like a memory waiting to happen." He exhaled slowly, his grip tightening. "Then we change it." "How?" She looked at him, desperate. "What if we're not supposed to? What if this grief is the price of something bigger? What if the spirit isn't trying to save you, but trying to make sure I feel this?" Draco studied her, his gray eyes reflecting the storm outside, and something else. "The decision, then let it hurt," he said quietly. "But not yet, not like that." And for the first time, Hermione believed that maybe, just maybe, they weren't just fighting fate. The library was silent, save for the whisper of parchment and the occasional creak of an overstuffed bookshelf settling into the stone. Moonlight spilled through the high-arched windows, painting silver streaks across the long tables, catching dust motes in a slow, drifting dance. Hermione sat with her back rigid, eyes scanning the same passage for the third time, her fingers tracing the frayed edge of the open tome before her. It was a grimoire from the restricted section, bound in what looked like charred leather, its ink faded to a bruised violet. The language was a dialect of ancient Aramaic, layered with alchemical sigils that pulsed faintly under the candlelight, only visible when one wasn't looking directly at them. She rubbed her temples. Her head throbbed, a dull ache behind her eyes, as if the symbols themselves were pushing back against her understanding. She'd been at it for hours, chasing the same thread, the one the spirit had whispered to her 2 nights ago, its voice like wind through cracked glass. "Star. Look for the mark beneath the bloodline. Star." A floorboard groaned. She looked up sharply. Draco stood in the shadows near the restricted section's iron gate, his pale hair catching the moonlight like spun silver. He looked different, tense, guarded, but not in the usual way. This was something deeper, something unsettled. He held his left forearm as though it pained him. "You're late," she said, keeping her voice low. "I couldn't come sooner." He stepped forward, and the light caught the sleeve of his shirt, rolled up to the elbow. That's when she saw it. A mark, small, circular, etched, just below the crook of his elbow. It wasn't a scar, not quite. The skin was unbroken, but the pigmentation had shifted into a pattern, 3 interlocking spirals surrounding a central high-shaped glyph. Her breath caught. "That's—" She pushed the grimoire toward her. "That's star and star here." Draco hesitated, then sat across from her, rolling his sleeve further up. The mark was warm to the touch, she noticed when she reached out. Hesitant, then firm. Her fingertip hovered just above it. The symbol tingled against her skin faintly, like static. "It appeared last night," he said quietly. "I thought it was a bruise at first. But its star changed star. Like it was forming." Hermione flipped through the pages, her pulse quickening. There, on a page that hadn't been visible earlier, as if the book itself had rearranged, was an illustration nearly identical to the mark. Beneath it, a line in the same violet ink, "Star the Guardian Seal, appears only when the tether is forged. He who bears it is neither living nor lost, but bound to the thread of what was and what will be." "Star," she read it aloud. Draco went very still. "Tether?" he asked. "What tether?" "The spirit said we're linked," she murmured. "Not just by this mission, but by time itself, like our fates are." Nodded. She exhaled sharply, turning his arm to study the mark. "So I'm marked by some ancient magic I never asked for. Fantastic." "It's not a curse," she said, softer now. "Look at the context. It's a star seal star, a protection. The guardian, it's not trying to harm you. It's trying to bind you to something, to star someone's star." Draco looked up, his gray eyes searching hers. "You," she didn't answer right away. The air between them felt charged, thick with something unspoken. The candle flame flickered, and for a moment the shadows in the room stretched too long, too deep. A whisper brushed the edge of her hearing, faint, like breath against glass. "Star, remember the hour when the clock stops." Star, Silence. Draco pulled his sleeve down, but not before she saw his hand tremble. "If this mark means I'm running out of time," he said, voice low, "then we'd better not waste another second." She nodded, closing the book with care. "Then we start where the ritual begins. The old clock tower. Midnight." He met her gaze. "You really think we'll find answers there?" "I think," she said, standing. "That time has tried to speak to us. And for once, Draco, I think it's on our side." Rain tapped against the window panes of the abandoned classroom, a steady rhythm like fingers drumming on a glass. Hermione stood near the cracked blackboard, her wand clenched in one hand, breath shallow. The air smelled of dust and old ink, but beneath it, a sharper scent, like ozone after lightning. Then the temperature dropped. Draco was behind her, back pressed to the doorframe, arms crossed. He hadn't wanted to come, but the spirit had whispered his name in her dreams again, and this time it left a mark, a sigil drawn in frost across her dormitory mirror. They both knew they had no choice. A shimmer bloomed in the center of the room, not quite light, not quite shadow. It pulsed once, twice, then split, like a fractured mirror, reflecting pieces of a life never lived. And then Star stepped through. Not Draco, not quite. This version wore Hogwarts robes, torn at the sleeve, stained with soot, and something darker. His left arm ended in a jagged stump, cauterized by magic, and his eyes, silver but hollow, locked onto Hermione with a grief so deep it made her stagger. She whispered his name, though she didn't know how she knew it. "You survived," the figure said, voice raw, as if spoken through broken glass. "Last time, you didn't." Draco stepped forward, jaw tight. "Last time? What in Merlin's name are you talking about?" The spirit, this broken Draco, didn't look at him. His gaze stayed on Hermione. "The library fire. You remember it? 6th year, row 9. Restricted section. You went back for the Star Eternum Codex star." "I followed." Hermione's breath caught. Did Star remember that night? The flicker of flame, the smoke curling under the door. She'd gone back, against all reason, because she thought she'd forgotten a page. But Draco hadn't followed. No one had. Except in this man's memory, he had. "You pulled me out," he continued, voice trembling. "But the ceiling collapsed. I pushed you clear. Took the beam across my back, my arm. I bled out before help came. I didn't even know," Hermione whispered. "You couldn't," he said. "That timeline collapsed, burned away. But I remember. I remember every second. Every breath I lost. Every word I never got to say." Draco's voice cut in, sharp. "So you're me? A version of me that died." The spirit nodded slowly. "On what happens when she matters more than survival? When love overrides instinct. When I choose her, not once, not twice, but every time the path splits." Hermione's chest tightened. "Then why are you here? To show us this? To make us afraid?" "No," he said, stepping closer. Frost spread beneath his feet. "To make you remember Star. The tether between you isn't accident. It's echo, every time a choice bends toward you. Hermione, a version of me dies trying to reach you." Draco's hands clenched. We're not. "You will be," the spirit interrupted. "Then when the moment comes, the one the fates have circled, the same choice will appear. Sacrifice or survive. And if you hesitate, history won't wait to correct itself." He reached out then, not touching, but his fingers brushed the air between them. A vision tore through the room, not of fire, but of snow. A bridge, a wand slipping from pale fingers, Hermione screaming a name that echoed like a prayer. Then silence. When Hermione looked again, the spirit was fading, his form cracking like old porcelain. But just before he vanished, he smiled. A sad, knowing thing. "I forgave you long ago," he said. "Now make sure the next me doesn't have to." The room warmed. The sigil on the floor dissolved into mist. Draco exhaled, shaky. That was me? Dying for you?" Hermione turned to him, eyes glistening. "Dying Star because Star of me, because of what we might become." Outside, the rain slowed. Somewhere deep in the castle, a bell tolled once. Between them, unseen, something ancient and fragile began to hum, a thread pulled taut across time, vibrating with the weight of choices not yet made. The rain fell in silver sheets across the black lake, blurring the line between water and sky until the horizon vanished beneath a shroud of mist. Hermione stood at the edge of the stone dock, her cloak damp and heavy, fingers curled around the vial of time-thickened air the spirit had left behind. It pulsed faintly in her palm, like a heartbeat, not quite her own. She'd examined it under every charm, every incantation she knew. Protean, Tempus Revelio, even the forbidden Cronus Unveil, but the vial gave nothing away. Only whispers, only echoes. Draco appeared behind her, his footsteps soft on the wet stone. He didn't speak at first. He'd learned, in these past days, when silence was necessary. "It's him," she said, voice low. "Not some forgotten soul, not a guardian of time. It's Star, you Star, or a version of you. I can feel it in the resonance of the spells, the way the spirit phrases things, too precise, too familiar. It knows things only someone who's lived through certain moments would know. Things Star, you Star know," Draco exhaled, slow and measured. "And what if it is? What does that even mean, Granger? That a future me is reaching back to save myself? That doesn't make sense. Unless," she said, turning to face him, "this isn't about saving you at all. What if it's about Star becoming Star you? What if the spirit isn't trying to prevent your death? It's trying to force a version of you into existence, one shaped by loss, by sacrifice, by Star me Star." A flicker passed through Draco's eyes, something between disbelief and dread. "You think I'd manipulate time just to, what, recreate myself?" "I think," she said, stepping closer, "that if a version of you had lived through enough timelines, seen enough failures, he might decide the only way forward is to engineer the very conditions that forged him. Pain, regret. A bond," she hesitated, "like the one we're forming." The wind tugged at her hair, strands sticking to her cheeks. Draco looked away, jaw tight. "And you believe we're being star-guided towards something? That every clue, every memory we've walked through, it's not random, it's not fate, it's star design, star fate," Star whispered. "Does not, and if the spirit is you, or was you, then it knows how to push us. It knows which memories to show, which moments to linger on. The way you looked at me in that ultimate timeline, when I chose to stay in the room of requirement, when we fought side by side against the Dementors in Hogsmeade, those weren't accidents. They were star-planted star." Draco turned sharply. "You'd think I'd want that?" "I think," she said, voice trembling, "that someone who's died once, twice, 100 times, might become desperate enough to rewrite everything, even love, especially love. Because if you could make a star choose Star you, not out of chance, but because the path led nowhere else, then maybe, just maybe, you'd survive." The air between them thickened. The vial in her hand grew warm, almost painful. A faint hum rose from it, like a voice trying to form words. Draco reached out, not for the vial, but for her hand. His fingers were cold, but his grip was steady. "I didn't ask for this. Whatever version of me is out there, whatever he's done, that's not me. Not now." She looked down at their joined hands, rain slipping between their skin. "But what if it's inevitable? What if by resisting, we're just playing into the script? Then we write a new one," he said, voice low but firm. "Together, not because some ghost of a future demands it, but because we choose it." The vial pulsed once, and then fell silent. The air above the lake shimmered like heat rising from stone, though the evening was cool and the trees stood still. Hermione stepped forward, boots crunching over frost-rimmed earth, her breath curling in pale wisps before her. Behind her, Draco paused at the tree line, his wand half drawn, eyes narrowed at the water's surface. It didn't ripple, not from wind, not from creatures, not even when a leaf detached from an overhanging branch and struck its surface. It simply sank without a sound. "This isn't natural," he said quietly. "No," Hermione agreed. "It's not. This is a convergence point, where time doesn't flow, it pools. Echoes get trapped here. Memories that were never lived, choices that were abandoned, they sink." She pulled the silver locket from her robes, the one the spirit had left behind days ago, cold to the touch and etched with symbols that shifted when not observed directly. When she opened it, a soft blue light spilled out, illuminating the space between them. A whisper followed, faint but unmistakable, the same voice that had haunted her dreams. "Star, find what was given up." Star Draco exhaled sharply. "It's talking again." "She," Hermione corrected. "It calls itself Alara. And she's not just speaking to me anymore, is she?" He didn't answer, but the way his fingers tightened around his wand told her everything. They walked to the shore together, moving slowly, as if approaching something sacred or dangerous. The water was black and glassy, yet deep within, faint glimmers pulsed like distant stars. Shapes moved beneath, not fish, not plants, but shadows with form and intent. One surfaced briefly, a man in Hogwarts robes, older, his face heartbreakingly familiar. Draco flinched. "That's me," he murmured, "but not me." "No," Hermione said. "That's a version of you, one who made a different choice." The locket grew warmer in her palm. She knelt, holding it over the water. As the light touched the surface, the lake responded, the reflections beneath shifting, rearranging. Scenes flickered like pages turning too fast. A younger Draco, standing in the room of requirement, wand lowered, reaching out to Harry, instead of laughing. Hermione, stepping onto the Hogwarts Express alone, turning back before the train left, choosing to stay with her parents in Australia. A battlefield at dusk, where Draco stood between her and a killing curse, robes torn, blood on his lips, a moment that never happened. "Stop," Draco breathed. But Hermione leaned closer. "We need to see. This is where the answers are." Another image surfaced, the two of them, hand in hand, walking through Diagon Alley, heads bent in quiet conversation. A child, with her curls and his sharp eyes, tugged at their hands. The vision lingered longer than the others. Draco stared, his breath unsteady. "That could have been," he said, voice rough. "If things had been different. If we'd trusted each other sooner," she whispered. The locket pulsed once sharply, and the lake darkened. The water began to rise not in waves, but in a slow, deliberate swell. From its center, a figure emerged, translucent, draped in silver mist, her hair drifting as if underwater. Alara. Her eyes were ancient, glowing faintly with the same blue light as the locket. "You see now," she said, her voice echoing from everywhere and nowhere. "Time is not a line. It is an ocean. And Draco's death is not one wave. It is the storm that drowns all possible futures." Hermione stood, heart pounding. "Then why show us these? They're just dreams." "No," Alara said. "They are fragments of what was almost real, and one of them holds the key. You must find the moment he chose duty over survival. That is where the tether begins." Draco stepped forward. "I've made 1,000 choices." "How do we know which one?" Alara turned to him, and for the first time her expression softened. "You already do." The lake stilled. The visions faded, and as the first stars blinked above, Hermione reached for Draco's hand, not out of fear, but certainty. "We go in," she said. He looked at her, then at the water. "Together?" She nodded. "Always." The air in the room of requirement shimmered like heat above stone, trembling as if caught between breaths. Hermione stood barefoot on cool, damp earth, though she remembered stone floors only seconds before. The scent of moss and river water filled her lungs, thick and green, carrying the hush of a world not yet disturbed by time. Before her stretched a shallow creek, its surface dappled with late afternoon light filtering through willow branches that swayed without wind. She knew this place, though she had never been here. And then she saw him. Draco sat on a flat stone at the water's edge, sleeves rolled to his elbows, bare feet dangling in the slow current. He was laughing, softly, freely, in a way she had never heard. Not the sharp, mocking sound of their school years, nor the brittle amusement of their uneasy truce in the war's aftermath, but something warm, unguarded. He reached down, plucked a smooth stone from the stream bed, and skipped it across the water with a flick of his wrist. 3 skips, then 4. She took a step forward, but the ground gave no sound beneath her. The moment felt fragile, like glass held together by breath. He turned then, sensing her, and his smile didn't falter. "You're late," he said, voice low and easy. "I was beginning to think you'd changed your mind." "I didn't even know I was coming," she answered, the words slipping out before she could question them. They felt true. Draco stood, water dripping from his toes, and walked toward her. No wand at his side, no family crest on his robes, just simple clothes, worn but cared for, and eyes that held none of the old shadows. "You always do," he said, "but you come anyway." She wanted to ask what he meant, wanted to demand how this was possible, whether this was memory or prophecy or some cruel illusion spun by the spirit that haunted them. But the words caught in her throat. Instead she reached out, tentative, and brushed her fingers against his. His skin was warm, real. "You're not afraid," she whispered. "No," he said. "Are you?" She was. Not of him, but of wanting this too much. Of believing in a future that had no right to exist. Behind them, the willows rustled, and the light shifted, golden to amber, as if time itself were slowing to savor the moment. He stepped closer, close enough that she could see the faint scar along his jaw, familiar from the war. But here, it looked softened, almost forgotten. "We've earned this," Hermione said, her name on his lips like something cherished, "even if no one remembers it but us." She closed her eyes. The sound of the water, the scent of earth, the quiet certainty in his voice, it wove around her like a spell. When she opened them again, he was cupping her face, his thumb tracing the curve of her cheek. She leaned into it, unthinking, unresisting. "This isn't real," she murmured, though her heart rebelled against the truth. "It will be," he said, "if you don't let go." And then the world rippled. The creek vanished. The willows dissolved into mist. The warmth of his hands faded like smoke. She was back in the room of requirement on cold stone, gasping as if pulled from deep water. Draco stood across the room, pale and wide-eyed, one hand still outstretched. "You saw it too," she said, voice trembling. He nodded slowly, his breath unsteady. "I've never felt anything like that." Neither had she. Not even with Ron. Not even in dreams. Outside, thunder rolled across the castle, but inside, the silence was thicker than stone. The spirit had shown them many things, warnings, echoes, fractured deaths, but this was different. This was a future they had never dared imagine, and for the first time, Hermione wasn't sure whether they were running from fate or being pulled toward it. Rain lashed the stained glass of the astronomy tower, turning the stars into smears of silver behind weeping panes. Hermione stood just inside the archway, breath shallow, fingers curled around the cold stone sill. The air hummed, not with magic, not exactly, but with something older. Something frayed at the edges like cloth pulled apart by time. Then it appeared. The spirit flickered into being mid-air, not quite solid, not quite ghost. Its form shifted. A child's face one moment, an old man the next, its edges dissolving and reforming like smoke caught in a draft. But this time it didn't spiral away. This time it turned its face. Hermione couldn't tell if it had eyes toward her, and spoke. "Listen. You must listen." The voice was layered, as if a dozen versions of the same person whispered at once, each a fraction out of sync. Hermione flinched, her wand half raised, but she didn't cast. Something in the tone held her. Desperation, yes, but also clarity. This was not the usual fractured plea. This was meaning. Draco Malfoy must not walk the northern corridor after midnight. She blinked. "What? Why?" "The path is wrong. The stone is cracked. The choice is already made, but not yet. He will turn left when he must turn right. And if he does," the spirit shuddered, its form collapsing inward like a star imploding, then snapping back. "He dies, not in blood, not in flame, but in silence. A breath that does not return, a name that is forgotten." Hermione's pulse hammered in her throat. When does this happen?" "Tonight, but not yet. The clock ticks backward in his shadow. You must stop him." She stepped forward. "Why me? Why not tell him yourself?" "Because he does not believe. Because he sees only scorn and warnings. Because you are tethered. The thread between you grows stronger. You feel it, do you not?" She did. She had felt it for days, the strange pull in her chest whenever Draco was near, the dreams of hallways that didn't exist, of a version of him with silver scars across his cheeks, whispering her name like a prayer. She had tried to dismiss it as stress, as residual magic from the last Horcrux hunt. But now, standing in the storm-lit tower, with the spirit's fractured breath curling like mist before her, she could no longer deny it. "Tell me how to stop him," she said. The spirit tilted its head. "You already know. You've seen the path. The third step from the tapestry of the centaurs. The stone sinks. He will not see it. He will not hear the whisper beneath the floor. But you will." She swallowed. "And if I warn him?" Then time stutters. Possibilities branch. One path ends in light. The others. The voice fractured. The others drown in echo. A gust of wind howled through the open arch, extinguishing the torches. The spirit flickered violently, its outline fraying at the edges. "He does not trust you," it whispered, now with a single voice, soft, almost kind. "But he will, because you will show him a memory that was never his. You will speak a truth, only he would deny. And in that moment, he will choose, not because he believes, but because he believes in you." The air crackled. The spirit's form began to unravel. Wait, what memory, what truth? But it was already gone, leaving only the scent of old parchment, and a single word, hanging in the air like a dying breath: sacrifice. Hermione stood frozen, rain soaking her robes, the weight of the warning pressing against her ribs. Somewhere in the castle, a clock began to chime. 12 strokes, midnight. The air in the abandoned wing of Hogwarts tasted of dust and old magic, thick with silence that pressed against Hermione's ears like cotton. Before her, Draco stood motionless, his fingers brushing the cracked surface of a time-smoothed mirror. The glass didn't reflect him, or her. Instead, it shimmered with fractured images. A battlefield under a blood-red moon, a hand reaching through fire, a child's laughter, swallowed by thunder. The spirit had warned her not to touch it. "Star, walk away." "Star," it had whispered through the cracks in time, its voice like wind through dead leaves. "Star, he will break it. He will break everything. I Star." But Draco's breath hitched and his hand trembled, not with fear, but recognition. "I've seen this before," he murmured, voice rough. "Not the mirror, the moment. I don't know when or how, but I remember the weight of it." Hermione stepped closer, her wand lowered. The spirit had never been wrong, until now. Its warnings had guided them through collapsing corridors and false memories, through echoes of wars that never were. But this time something in her resisted. She studied Draco's profile, the sharp line of his jaw, the faint scar along his temple from a curse he shouldn't have survived. He had changed, not just in the months they'd been tethered together, but in the quiet ways that mattered. He didn't flinch when she questioned him. He didn't lie when he didn't know. And when the spirit had tried to turn her against him, twisting his words, distorting his past, he had simply stood there, waiting for her to see through the illusion. "You think it's important?" she asked, her voice softer than she intended. He didn't look at her. "I think, if I don't touch it, I'll spend the rest of my life wondering what I was afraid of." The spirit hissed in her mind, a cold breath against her thoughts. "Star, he lies. You know he lies." "Star," but she didn't believe it. Instead, she reached out and placed her hand over his. Draco stilled. His fingers were warm beneath hers, alive in a way the spirit could never be. Together they pressed their palms against the glass. The world shattered, not with noise but with silence, a vacuum where sound should have been. They fell not through space, but through memory. Not theirs, not exactly. They stood in Malfoy Manor, but not as it was. The tapestries were torn, the chandelier shattered. A younger Draco, no older than 16, knelt in the foyer, trembling, a wand in his hand and tears on his face. Before him, a figure in black robes lay still, unmoving, dead. Hermione's breath caught. "That's not." "No," Draco whispered. "It wasn't like this. I never killed anyone that night." But the memory didn't care. It played on. The younger Draco looked up, his eyes wide with horror, and then, impossibly, he looked directly at them. "You weren't supposed to see this," he said. And then the vision twisted, folding in on itself. They were in a classroom, Hermione's classroom, years in the future. She stood at the front, older, weary, teaching a lesson about temporal ethics. But her left hand was bare. No ring, no trace of him. Draco's voice was barely audible. "We weren't together, no," she admitted. "But we survived." Another shift, a hospital room, ran against the windows. Draco, pale and unconscious, a monitor beeping too slow. She sat beside him, clutching his hand, whispering words that didn't reach him. And then the machine flatlined. Hermione gasped, wrenching her hand back. The mirror cracked with a sound like ice breaking. Draco staggered, catching himself against the wall. "It's not fate," he said, breathless. "It's fear. All of it. The spirit. It's not showing us what will happen. It's showing us what we're afraid of." She looked at him, really looked. At the vulnerability in his eyes, the way he didn't hide it. At the trust he was offering, simply by standing there, asking her to believe him. The spirit screamed inside her head, a high-pitched wail of rage. "Star, you've doomed him, Star." But Hermione stepped forward and took his hand again. "No," she said, "I've chosen him." And for the first time, the spirit fell silent. The air in the hidden chamber beneath the Department of Mysteries was thick with the scent of damp stone and old magic, a low hum resonating through the floor like the breath of some slumbering beast. Hermione knelt beside the chalk diagram, her fingers tracing the intricate runes that pulsed faintly blue beneath her touch. They had spent weeks deciphering the spirit's cryptic warnings, whispers in the dead of night, reflections in mirrors that showed Draco older, broken, gone. And this was the culmination, the ritual of rejoining. "It's not just a warning," she murmured, more to herself than to Draco, who stood a few paces behind, his arms crossed tightly over his chest. "It's an anchor. The spirit isn't trying to stop time, it's trying to mend it." Draco exhaled sharply, his breath fogging in the cold air. "Mend what? My death, my life, or something else entirely?" His voice was steady, but she could hear the tremor beneath it, the same one that had surfaced each time the spirit appeared, its fractured form flickering like candlelight caught between seconds. "This ritual," Hermione said, rising slowly, "it doesn't just alter fate. It collapses timelines. 2 versions of reality. 2 choices, 2 lives, folded into one. The cost." She hesitated, her eyes scanning the ancient text etched into the stone beneath the chalk. "It's not written here. Not clearly. But there's a line. Star. The rejoining demands. A memory surrendered. A truth unmade star." Draco stepped forward, his boots echoing. "So one of us forgets something? That's the price?" "Seems light for rewriting time." "It's not just forgetting," she said quietly. "It's like excising a piece of yourself. A memory that shaped you. And not just any memory. One that defines you." Silence settled between them, broken only by the distant drip of water and the soft crackle of the glowing runes. The spirit had shown them fragments. Hermione standing alone in a war-torn Diagon alley, Draco clutching a wand that wasn't his in a world where Voldemort had won. Moments that never happened, yet felt real. Too real. "What if," Draco began, his voice low, "what if the spirit isn't trying to save me? What if it's trying to save itself? Or us? From something worse than my death?" Hermione turned to face him. In the dim, shifting light, his face looked older, worn by sleepless nights and the weight of unseen futures. She had seen him differently lately. Not the boy who sneered in the corridors, but the man who stayed up with her, translating forgotten incantations, who handed her tea without being asked, who flinched when the spirit whispered his name. "I don't think it wants to hurt us," she said, "but I don't think it understands the cost. Time isn't meant to be stitched back together like torn fabric. It frays, it unravels." Draco looked down at the diagram, then at her. "But if there's even a chance—" He stopped, jaw tightening. "If I die in that moment, and it's fixed by this, then someone has to pay the price. Might as well be me." "No," she said, sharper than she meant to. "It's not your choice alone. This involves both of us. The ritual. It's designed for 2. A tethered pair." She met his gaze. "That's us. The spirit bound us for a reason." He stared at her, something unreadable in his eyes. Then slowly, he reached into his coat and pulled out a small silver locket. One she hadn't seen before. He opened it. Inside was not a picture, but a sliver of frozen light, swirling like captured mist. "This appeared in my room last night," he said, along with a whisper, Star, the first lie you believed, Star. I think it's part of the ritual." A memory made manifest. Hermione reached out, not touching, but feeling the warmth that radiated from it. "And we're close, but once we start, there's no stopping it. We'll have to choose what we're willing to lose." Draco closed the locket with a soft click. "Maybe some truths," he said, "are meant to be unmade." Outside, the sky darkened. The stars blinked into place, unaware of the fragile threads of time trembling beneath their light. Rain lashed against the windows of the abandoned astronomy tower annex, each drop sounding like a whisper against the glass. Hermione stood with her back pressed to the cold stone, breath shallow, eyes fixed on the figure before her. Draco, his face pale under the flickering candlelight, one hand gripping the edge of a shattered telescope, stand as if it were the only thing anchoring him to reality. "It's happening again," he said, voice tight. She stepped forward, but he flinched. Don't come near me. Not yet." Hermione froze. She'd seen this before, the way his fingers trembled, the unnatural stillness creeping into his limbs, the way his silver eyes dulled, as though something were draining him from within. It had started as fleeting moments, just a second's delay in response, a stumble on the stairs, a blink too long. But now, it was different, stronger. As though the vision wasn't just showing him death, it was pulling him toward it. The spirit had warned her 2 nights ago, its voice like wind through broken glass. "Star, he walks the path now, the tether tightens." Star, she hadn't understood then, but she did now. Draco's breath came in short, uneven bursts. His head turned slowly, unnaturally, toward the far wall, the same wall that had collapsed in the vision, burying him beneath rubble and fire. His lips parted. "I can hear it," he whispered. "Stone, cracking." "There's no crack," Hermione said, forcing calm into her voice. "Look at me, Draco. It's not real, but it will be," he said, and the certainty in his tone chilled her. "I feel it, the weight of it, like gravity is changing, like the world is, bending me toward that moment." She edged closer, careful not to touch him. "That's not gravity, that's magic, dark temporal magic, and we've faced worse." He let out a hollow laugh. "Have we? Because this doesn't feel like a spell we can counter with a book or a countercharm. This feels like fate." "No such thing," she snapped, though her voice wavered. "Fate is just a story people tell when they're too afraid to fight." Draco turned his head to look at her then, and something in his gaze made her breath catch. It wasn't fear she saw, it was resignation, as if he'd already accepted it. Her fingers curled into fists. "You don't get to give up, not now, not when we're this close." "Close to what?" he asked, voice breaking. "Unraveling time? Breaking the world to save one life? Is that what we're doing?" "We're trying to understand," she said. "The spirit didn't come to kill you. It came to warn you. There's a reason. There's always a reason." He closed his eyes. "Maybe the reason is to show me how it feels, to walk willingly into the end." "Then fight it," she shouted, stepping forward and grabbing his wrist. The moment her skin touched his, a jolt surged between them. Not pain, but something deeper. Pulse of energy, ancient and electric, threading through their veins like a forgotten spell, reawakening. Draco gasped. So did she. For a heartbeat the world flickered. They were no longer in the tower. They stood in ruins, smoke thick in the air, the sky split with violent lightning. Bodies lay still beneath fallen columns. And there in the center of it all was Draco, older, broken, reaching for something just out of reach. Reaching for Star, her Star. Then, just as suddenly, they were back. Draco collapsed to his knees, breathing hard, eyes wide with terror and wonder. What was that?" he whispered. Hermione stared at her hand, still clutching his wrist. The air between them hummed, charged with something neither of them could name. "I don't know," she said. But it wasn't a memory. It was a possibility. He looked up at her, rain and candlelight mingling on his face. Then, why did it feel like a promise? She didn't answer. She couldn't. Because in that fractured vision, she'd seen something else. Something that hadn't been in any of the spirit's warnings. In that future, she had chosen him. And the world had burned anyway. Rain fell in silver sheets across the forgotten courtyard of what might have once been Hogwarts. though the towers leaned at angles no architect would allow, and the stones pulsed faintly, like a slow heartbeat beneath their feet. Hermione stepped forward, her boots sinking slightly into the damp flagstones, the air thick with the scent of ozone and old parchment. Beside her, Draco stood rigid, his wand half-drawn, eyes scanning the shifting archways that seemed to breathe in and out with time itself. "This isn't real," he muttered, though the chill on his skin and the weight of the silence said otherwise. "It's a memory," Hermione whispered, "but not ours." A figure emerged from the mist, a woman in a tattered version of a Gryffindor robe, her hair wild with static, eyes hollow with centuries of regret. It was Hermione, and yet not. Her face bore lines of grief that time had not yet carved into the living woman standing before her. "You left him," the other Hermione said, voice breaking like dry wood. "You let him walk into the Veil alone." Draco flinched. "The Veil, that's—" "Destroyed," the spectral woman interrupted. "In your world, yes, but here it still breathes. And he stepped through it to save you." Hermione's breath caught. "That never happened." "Because you didn't love him enough to try," the echo snapped, stepping forward, her form flickering between youth and decay. "You were afraid of what people would say, of what it meant, of how deeply you'd already fallen. So when the spirit came to you, you hesitated, and he made the choice for you." Draco's jaw tightened. "I wouldn't—" "You did," she said, cold. "You walked into the dark because she wouldn't take your hand." The courtyard shimmered, and suddenly they were watching it unfold. Another version of themselves standing at the edge of the tattered veil in the Department of Mysteries. This Hermione wore fear like armor, shaking her head as Draco reached for her. "It's suicide," she said, voice cracking. "We don't even know what's on the other side." "And if we do nothing, everyone dies," he replied, quieter than they'd ever heard him. "Including you. You don't know that. I know I can't live in a world where you're afraid to fight beside me." And then he stepped through. The veil swallowed him with a sound like 1,000 whispers dying at once. In the present, or whatever passed for it, Hermione staggered back, tears burning her eyes. "No, that wasn't—" "It was," the echo said, softer now. "And I let him go. I buried myself in books, in research, in anything that wasn't feeling. I told myself I was preparing. But I was just running." Draco looked at her, really looked, for the first time, not with suspicion or pride, but with something raw and unguarded. "You came back," he said. "That's what matters." The other Hermione smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I did, too late." The veil collapsed after him. There was no way in, no way to follow. "I spent 10 years trying to tear time apart to get him back. And when I finally found a crack, I became this, a ghost of a life not lived." She reached out, her fingers translucent, brushing Hermione's wrist. A jolt passed between them. Memories that weren't hers flooded in. Quiet conversations in the library. A hand brushed during patrol. A single kiss beneath the astronomy tower that ended too soon. A love that had been real, but unspoken. A bond severed before it could breathe. "You have a chance," the echo whispered. "Not to avoid pain, but to choose each other. Even when it's hard, even when it terrifies you." The courtyard began to dissolve, the stones crumbling into light. Hermione gripped Draco's arm. "We don't have to." "We do," he said, voice steady. "If even a part of this is true, I'm not letting you face it alone. And I'm not walking into anything without you holding my hand." The rain turned to mist. The echo faded with a sigh that sounded almost like relief, and somewhere, deep in the folds of time, a veil stirred. Rain lashed against the windows of the abandoned classroom, each drop striking the glass like a whispered warning. Hermione stood in the center of the room, her breath coming in shallow bursts, fingers clenched around the edge of a shattered hourglass she pulled from the rubble of a collapsed shelf. It had appeared overnight. No, not overnight. That was the problem. There had been no night, not really. She'd seen this moment before, the crack in the floorboard beneath her right foot, the way the flickering candlelight caught the silver thread tangled in the leg of the desk, the silence that followed the storm, thick and unnatural, as if time itself were holding its breath. And Draco standing in the doorway, pale as moonlight, his wand half raised, eyes wide with something between fear and recognition. "You're remembering," he said, voice low, almost reverent. "I'm not remembering," she whispered. I'm reliving. He stepped inside, closing the door behind him with a soft click that echoed too loudly in the stillness. Third time from me. Fourth for you, I think. She turned to him, heart-hammering. How do you know that? Because the first time, you didn't look at me. The second, you screamed. The third, he hesitated. The third, you tried to stop me from walking in. Said I'd die if I crossed the threshold. She swallowed. That was right. She had. And he hadn't listened. And now? She asked. Now you're holding the hourglass. You weren't before. She looked down at the broken device in her hands. Sand still trickled from the top bulb, though impossibly none fell to the bottom. It hovered, suspended, as if caught between seconds. This isn't a loop, she murmured. It's a fracture, a single moment torn open and stitched back together over and over, like a wound that won't heal. And each time I die, Draco said flatly. Same way, same spell. Same voice, yours, shouting my name too late. She flinched. She remembered that scream. It lived in her bones. But this time is different, she insisted. The spirit, it showed me something. Not just a warning, a pattern. The loop resets when you... She trailed off, eyes darting to the center of the room. Die, he finished. But not just die. I die star after star you speak. After you say, Draco, she breathed. Their eyes met. A silence stretched between them, fragile and electric. It's not the spell that kills me, he said slowly. It's your voice. That's impossible. Is it? You've said my name 3 times across the loops. Each time, right before the curse hits. As if saying it star triggers star it. Her stomach twisted. No, that can't be true. I wouldn't want. You wouldn't what? 'Cause maybe you don't. Maybe it's not you. Maybe it's the timeline itself. It hears your voice, recognizes the moment, and forces it to happen. Like a record skipping back to the same groove, she thought of the spirit, the translucent figure that flickered at the edges of her vision, its mouth moving in silent words she couldn't understand. It had shown her fragments, Draco falling, her hands reaching, a clock melting into black water, and always, her voice, her saying his name, echoing backward through the moments like a key turning in a lock. If that's true, she whispered, then we can't let me say it again. He took a slow step toward her. Then don't, not until we're out. But how do we break it? We've tried avoiding this room. We've tried binding time. We've even tried star, not speaking to each other star. And the loop pulled us back anyway. He finished. Because it wants this moment, its star needs star it. She closed her eyes, thinking, what if the spirit isn't warning us about your death, but about the star of remembering it? What if every time we recall the moment, we anchor it deeper? Draco exhaled sharply. So we stop remembering. We stop star reacting star. She corrected. We step through it, without fear, without words, like it's not fated at all. He studied her, gray eyes sharp. And if it still kills me, then at least it won't be because I called your name. Outside the rain stopped. The candlelight steadied, and for the first time the sand in the broken hourglass began to fall. Rain lashed against the ancient stained glass of the room of requirement, each drop a tiny drumbeat against the weight of the silence between them. The air smelled of damp parchment and cold iron, the kind of chill that seeped into bone and stayed. Hermione stood by the flickering hearth, her fingers tracing the edge of a shattered hourglass. They pulled from the ruins of a forgotten corridor, an artifact the spirit had named Star, the Keeper's Eye Star. That is Saturn's. Its sand had run backward 3 times since they'd found it, each reversal accompanied by a whisper in a language neither of them understood. Draco sat on the floor, back against the stone wall, one hand pressed flat against the floor as if grounding himself. His breath came slow, deliberate. The last vision had taken more from him than the others. His skin still shimmered faintly at the edges, like light catching on fractured glass. He hadn't spoken since it passed. It showed me again, he said finally, voice low. The staircase. The collapse. The scream. Mine, I think. Or maybe it was someone else's. It's always too loud to tell. Hermione turned. But this time, you came back faster. He looked up at her, silver eyes shadowed. Because I listened to your voice. Not the spirit's. Yours. She knelt beside him, the warmth of the fire at her back. What did it say this time? It said I was already dead. He exhaled, a puff of mist in the cold air. That I've been dead for years, that everything after, this, us, the search, is just an echo trying to correct itself. That's not true, she said, sharper than she meant to. You're here, you're breathing, you're star, real star. Am I? He turned his palm up, watching the veins shift under pale skin. Sometimes I feel like I'm unraveling. Like every time the spirit pulls me, I lose a piece, a memory, a feeling. And the worst part, I don't even notice until it's gone. Hermione reached for his hand. He didn't pull away. His fingers were cold, but they curled around hers. I remember the first time it came to me, he said. I thought I was going mad. A ghost with no face, speaking in riddles about fate and fractures. I didn't believe it. Not until it showed me my mother. Alive, in a house I've never seen, calling me by a name I've never used. Star Dorian. Star. He swallowed. I dreamed that name for weeks after. Woke up calling for her. Hermione's breath caught. You never told me that. No, because it felt like betrayal. Like remembering something I wasn't supposed to. He looked at her, really looked. But then you started seeing it too, and you didn't run. You didn't call me insane. You star-believed star me, and you started finding patterns, clues in old texts, in the castle's wards, in the way time stutters near certain doors. I had to, she whispered, because if I didn't, no one would. A quiet laugh, brittle, but real. You always were the one who held the world together with logic and stubbornness, and you were the one who pretended he didn't need holding. The room shifted subtly, the walls breathed, the shelves rearranged. The room of requirement was listening, responding. It had become their sanctuary, their library, their prison, a space shaped by their shared need. Draco leaned his head back against the stone. The spirit wants me to accept my death, says it's the only way to mend the fracture, but every time I try, I hear you, telling me to fight, telling me to come back. You star, can star come back? Because of you. He turned his hand, lacing his fingers with hers. I don't trust the spirit. I don't even know what it is. Ghost, echo, curse. But I trust star, you star. You're the only thing that feels constant. The only thing that feels real. Hermione's throat tightened. You're not alone in this. No, he said softly. And maybe that's the anchor. Not the hourglass. Not the clues. Star you, star. Outside the storm raged on. But inside, for the first time in weeks, the air felt still, safe, and in that stillness something unspoken settled between them, tender, fragile, and fiercely alive. The air in the room of requirement thickened, heavy with the scent of old parchment and damp stone, though the room had conjured nothing but a ring of faintly glowing candles around them. Hermione stood with her wand raised, its tip trembling as the spectral figure flickered before her, and Draco, tall, cloaked, its face half hidden beneath a veil of shifting light. It had spoken in riddles for days, always vanishing before they could ask the right questions. But tonight something had changed. The spirit's voice, once distant and echoing, now cracked with something painfully human. You don't understand, it whispered, and the words dissolved into static before reforming. I am not who you think I am. Draco took a step back, his fingers brushing against the wall as if grounding himself. Then who are you? If you're not me, my future, then what in Merlin's name are you? The spirit lowered its head. For a moment the veil of light thinned, and Hermione gasped. Beneath it was Draco's face, but not. The eyes were hollow, shadowed by grief and time that had never passed. One side of his face bore a jagged scar that hadn't been there before, and his hair fell in silver-streaked strands over a brow furrowed with regrets. I am what remains, the spirit said, a fragment forged in the moment you died. Hermione's breath caught. Died? Yes, the spirit said, turning to her. 12 years from now, during the eclipse of the Ministry, when the time vaults collapsed. You were trying to stop the cascade. He stepped in front of you. Draco's voice was sharp. That hasn't happened. It never will. But it did, the spirit insisted, its form flickering like candlelight in a draught. In one thread of time, yes, a single possibility, but when the timeline fractured, something lingered, a resonance, a wound in time so deep it refused to close, and from that wound, I was born, not a soul, not a ghost, a temporal echo. A memory with teeth. Hermione's mind raced. So you're not a warning from the future, you're a remnant. A consequence. The spirit nodded. I was drawn to you both, not because I know the future, but because I remember the pain, the silence after, the way the world kept turning when it should have stopped. Draco's hands curled into fists. Then why show us this? If it's just one possibility, why torment us with it? Because, the spirit said, voice softening. That moment, the collapse, it wasn't an accident. It was triggered. Someone opened the vaults knowing the risk, knowing someone would die to seal the breach. Hermione stepped forward. Who? The spirit's form wavered, as if the answer cost it. I don't know their face, but I know their spell, a sigil carved in obsidian, a name spoken in Parseltum. Draco went still. Parseltum. The spirit's eyes met his. You felt it, didn't you, before I came? The pull, the dreams of falling through time. That was me, reaching back, tethered to you by the moment of my creation. Hermione turned to Draco, searching his face. You never told me about dreams. He looked away. I didn't want to sound mad. You're both already mad, the spirit said, almost gently, but not doomed. Silence settled between them, thick and fragile. Outside, the castle glowed with the weight of the night, but within the room, time itself seemed to pause. Then Hermione spoke, voice steady. If you're not here to change fate, then what are you here for? The spirit reached out, not to touch, but to point, not at Draco, but at the space between them. To show you what must survive, not him, not me, but this, the tether. The choice to stand together when every path says to turn away. And with that, the candles dimmed, and the spirit dissolved into motes of silver light, leaving behind only a single phrase whispered on the edge of hearing. Star, remember the sigil. Star. Hermione tapped against the stained glass of the abandoned classroom like fingers, testing a lock. Hermione stood in the center of the room, wand clenched so tightly her knuckles had faded to bone white. Across from her, Draco leaned against a crumbling bookshelf, his breath shallow, his gray eyes flickering between her and the shimmering figure suspended above the cracked stone floor. The spirit hovered, translucent and pulsing with fractured light, like glass caught in a storm. Its face was indistinct, shifting between youth and age, male and female, familiar and alien. But its voice, when it came, was always the same, layered, echoing from multiple directions at once. Star! You still don't understand. Star, it whispered, the words curling through the air like smoke. Star, I am not the one who needs saving. Star, Hermione swallowed. Then why show us all this? The visions, the echoes, the moment of the fall. You've haunted Draco for weeks, warned me. Led us through memories that never happened, places we've never been, choices we never made. The spirit tilted its head. Star, because I am not a warning. I am a consequence. Star, Draco pushed off the shelf, stepping forward. A consequence of what? Star, of time unraveling, of a single breath held too long, a word left unspoken. You stood at the edge of a crossroads, both of you, though you did not see it. And when the moment came, you hesitated. Star, Hermione remembered. The memory wasn't hers, yet it lived in her bones. A corridor beneath the astronomy tower. A wand raised. A curse forming on Draco's lips. But not at her. At someone else. A shadow in a hood. And she had reached for him. Not to stop him, but to pull him back. Away from violence. Away from fate. But she hadn't been fast enough. In the vision, the curse had still fired. The shadow had fallen. And then, time had cracked. The spirit flared brighter, its form rippling. Star. That moment was a knot. You touched it, and the fabric split. Time minds branched. I am what remains, what leaks through the tear. Star. Draco's voice was rough. So you're what happens if we fail. Star. No, I am what happens if you succeed, and still lose. Star. Hermione felt the weight of it settle over her like a shroud. She'd spent weeks chasing a way to save the spirit, to anchor it, to mend whatever wound in time allowed it to exist. But now, she saw, there was no healing this, no reversal. The spirit wasn't a person trapped in time. It was the echo of a future that could no longer be, screaming back through the fracture. "You're not trying to stop Draco's death," she said softly. "You're trying to make sure something else happens before it." The spirit lowered slowly, until its eyes, now unmistakably Draco's, but aged by sorrow, met hers. "Star, change the moment, not the outcome, the meaning." Star Draco exhaled. "So I still die, Star perhaps, but not in vain, not forgotten." Star Hermione turned to him. Rainwater dripped from the edge of her sleeve. "Then we don't save you by stopping it. We save you by making it matter." He looked at her, really looked, and for the first time there was no mask, no sneer, just quiet acceptance, and something deeper, something like peace. "We follow the last clue," he said. "The locked door beneath the clock tower. The one that only opens when both of us speak the same word." She nodded. Together, the spirit began to fade, its edges dissolving into motes of light. "Star, remember, time is not a line. It is a choice, and you have already made it." "Star." Then it was gone. The rain softened. The air stilled. Hermione reached for Draco's hand. He didn't pull away. They walked toward the door, not because they believed they could outrun fate, but because they had finally learned how to walk through it. The air inside the labyrinth tasted like old parchment and lightning, sharp and electric on the tongue. Hermione stepped forward, her boots sinking slightly into the stone floor that pulsed beneath her like a slow, sleeping heartbeat. Walls of fractured glass rose on either side, not reflecting the present but flickering with moments that never were. Draco laughing with his father in a sunlit courtyard, Hermione standing alone in a ruined ministry, robes torn, wand broken. She flinched, pulling her gaze away. "This is wrong," Draco muttered, his voice tight. He stood close, closer than he would have a week ago, his arm nearly brushing hers. His gray eyes darted across the shifting panels, wary. "None of this happened. Because its star didn't star happen," she said, forcing calm into her voice. "These are echoes, splinters of timelines that were erased or never formed. The spirit said, we had to find the center. That's where the fracture is widest." "And what then?" He turned to her, shadows dancing across his sharp features. "Do we fix it? Break it? Get ourselves lost forever?" She didn't answer. She didn't know. The path ahead split. No, its star changed star. The left corridor, stretching into something narrower. The right folding in on itself like a dying breath. Hermione reached into her pocket, pulling out the small silver compass the spirit had left behind. Its needle spun wildly, then settled, not pointing north, but star forward star, through the shifting air. "It's guiding us," she whispered. "Or leading us into a trap," Draco said, but he followed when she stepped ahead. They moved in silence for a while, the only sound the soft crunch of stone underfoot, and the distant ghostly murmurs of voices, speaking in languages that sounded almost familiar. A cold wind curled around them, carrying the scent of rain and burg rosemary. Hermione shivered. She thought she saw Ginny's face in one of the glass panels, her eyes full of grief. Then it was gone. "You keep doing that," Draco said suddenly. She glanced at him. "Doing what?" "Touching your left sleeve, like you're checking for something." Hermione froze. She hadn't even realized. Slowly she pulled back the fabric, revealing a faint silver mark on her wrist, 3 interlocking spirals, glowing faintly. It hadn't been there yesterday, or had it? She couldn't remember. "I don't know what it is," she admitted. "But I think it's connected to the tether. The one between us." Draco stared at it, then at her. "You're changing. We both are." A low hum filled the air, and the walls began to shift more rapidly. The path twisted, stone groaning as new corridors opened, and others sealed shut. The compass trembled in Hermione's hand, its needle now pointing straight down. "It's below us," she said. Draco looked at the floor. "There's no staircase. There doesn't need to be." She stepped forward, and the ground gave way. They fell, not into darkness, but into light. When they landed, it was gently, on a platform suspended in a void. Above them, Stars blinked in impossible constellations, some moving backward, others flickering in and out, like dying candles. Before them stood a mirror, tall and ancient, its frame carved with runes that shifted when not looked at directly, and in its surface, neither of them. Instead, two figures stood hand in hand, older, weary, their faces lined with time and sorrow. Hermione in robes of deep violet, Draco with silver, threading through his hair. They were looking at each other, not with hatred or distance, but with a quiet, unbreakable understanding. "That's us?" Draco breathed. "No," Hermione said, voice barely a whisper. "Not us. Not yet. But maybe. Could we?" The image wavered, then fractured. In its place, a scene of fire, Draco falling, the sky cracking open like an eggshell, and Hermione screaming his name. She staggered back. "That's the moment," she said. "The one the spirit warned about. It's not some distant fate. It's star here. Star. It's now. It's now." Draco turned to her, his face pale but resolute. "Then we change it." "How?" "By not being who we were." And in that moment the silver mark on her wrist flared, and the mirror cracked down the center, not with sound, but with silence. The air in the labyrinth's core was thick with the scent of ozone and old stone, a hum beneath their feet, like the pulse of some slumbering beast. Hermione's fingers trembled against the cold wall, her breath shallow as she stepped forward, Draco close behind. The walls here were no longer mere rock. They shimmered, translucent at the edges, revealing flickering images, a corridor ablaze, a staircase collapsing, a hand reaching out just before vanishing into shadow. Each vision passed like a wisp of smoke, gone before it could be grasped. "Do you feel that?" Draco asked, his voice low, almost reverent. Hermione nodded. It was more than feeling. It was recognition, as if her bones remembered this place from a life she'd never lived. The spirit had led them here, through riddles carved in forgotten runes, past mirrors that showed not their faces but fractured versions of themselves, laughing, weeping, screaming, and always the same warning. "Star, he dies here." Again and again. "Star." But now the warnings had stopped. The spirit had not spoken in hours. Ahead, the corridor opened into a circular chamber, its ceiling lost in darkness. At the center stood a pedestal of obsidian, cracked down the middle. Resting upon it was a simple hourglass, its sand frozen mid-fall. "That's impossible," Hermione whispered. Draco moved forward, drawn as if by a thread tied to his ribs. The moment his shadow touched the pedestal, the air split with a sound like glass breaking. The visions weren't on the walls anymore. They were all around. Dozens of Dracos, each frozen at the moment of death, struck by curses, falling from great heights, vanishing into rifts of light. And in each, his eyes met hers just before the end. "I didn't know." She breathed, her chest tight. "I didn't know it happened so many times." He turned to her, face pale but set. "Maybe it's not about stopping it. Maybe it's about understanding why it keeps happening." The hourglass trembled. A single grain of sand fell, and then the chamber changed. It stood in a great hall, but it was wrong. The banners were black, the tables splintered, the air thick with ash. A younger Draco, no older than 17, was on his knees, wand snapped, blood streaking his temple. Across from him, a cloaked figure raised a wand, its tip glowing crimson. "No," Hermione gasped. But she couldn't move. She was a ghost here, a witness to a memory that never was. Draco watched, face tight. "That's not me, not really. But it could have been," she said. "If things had gone differently, if you'd stayed." He didn't answer. The scene shifted, another timeline. Draco shielding a group of younger students from a collapsing tower. Another, where he stood alone against a tide of Death Eaters, casting curse after curse until his magic gave out. Each death was different, each ended the same, and in every one she arrived too late. The chamber snapped back into focus. The hourglass was half empty now, sand flowing in reverse. "It's not about saving me," Draco said, turning to her. "It's about choice. The spirit didn't bring us here to stop my death. It brought us here so I could choose it." Hermione's breath caught. "What are you talking about?" "Every time I died I was reacting, running, fighting, falling. but I never chose it, not really, not with my eyes open. He stepped toward the pedestal. The air worked around him, timelines spiraling like storm clouds. If I step forward, he began and then paused, looking at her. Do you trust me? Her heart hammered. She thought of all the versions of him she'd seen, brave, broken, defiant. She thought of the boy she'd hated, the man she'd come to understand, the future they might still have. Yes, she said, I do. He smiled, small, sad, sure, and placed his hand on the hourglass. The world dissolved, not into darkness, but into light, pure, golden, humming with possibility. And for the first time, the spirit appeared not as a shadow, but as a figure of radiant calm, its face neither young nor old, its eyes full of centuries. You have reached the heart of the paradox, it said, voice echoing from everywhere and nowhere. To save a life, you must first surrender it. To change fate, you must first accept it. Draco glanced back at Hermione, his fingers brushing hers one last time before letting go. Then he stepped forward, not away from death, but into it, on his own terms, and the timeline cracked open. Rain lashed against the windows of the abandoned ministry sublevel, the kind of downpour that made stone weep and shadows tremble. Hermione's breath came in short, sharp bursts as she pressed her back against the cold wall, wand clenched so tightly, her knuckles shone white. The air smelled of damp parchment, and something older, something frayed, like time unraveling at the seams. She could feel it, that familiar pressure building behind her eyes, the one that signaled the loop was about to reset. Again, Draco stood 10 paces ahead, frozen in the same position as always. Right hand outstretched toward the cracked hourglass embedded in the archway, left arm curled protectively around his ribs, where the curse would strike in exactly 17 seconds. The spirit hovered between them, translucent and flickering, its face a blur of fractured expressions. It had shown her this moment 12 times now, each variation ending the same. Draco falling, the hourglass shattering, and the world folding back upon itself like a wounded thing. But this time Hermione didn't move to stop him. Instead, she stepped forward, not toward Draco, but toward the spirit. I see you, she said, voice steady despite the tremor in her bones. You're not just showing me what happens. You're star-choosing star what I see. The spirit flinched, its form distorting as if struck. A low hum filled the chamber, the kind that vibrates in your teeth. Draco turned his head, confusion cutting through the pain already etched into his features. Granger, what are you doing? Move. She ignored him. Her gaze stayed locked on the wraith, whose edges now writhed like smoke caught in a draft. You've shown me every version where he dies, every angle, every delay, every spell I've tried. But you've never shown me one where I don't try to save him directly. Silence. Then, a whisper, so faint it might have been the wind through broken glass. Star, you cannot change fate by following it. Star Hermione exhaled, her fingers uncurled from her wand. She didn't raise it, didn't cast. Instead, she reached into the inner pocket of her robes and pulled out the small silver locket, Draco's, taken from his coat 3 loops ago when he hadn't been looking. It was warm in her palm, pulsing faintly, like a heartbeat out of time. I'm not trying to change fate, she said. I'm changing star, a star. And she threw the locket, not at the hourglass, not at Draco, but straight through the spirit. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the locket passed through the wraith's chest, and the air cracked like ice over a lake. The spirit screamed, a sound that wasn't sound, more like memory tearing. Light erupted, not from the archway, but from Draco himself, a golden thread, unraveling from his chest, and connecting, impossibly, to the locket, mid-air. The hourglass began to spin, not forward or backward, but star sideways star. Sand flowing upward, downward, inward. Draco staggered, clutching his chest. What did you do? I remembered, she said, stepping toward him at last. You weren't supposed to survive the curse, but you weren't supposed to die alone either. Every time I tried to stop it. But the spirit wasn't warning me about your death. It was mourning it. It's star your star echo, Draco. A piece of you that couldn't let go. He looked down at his hand, still outstretched, fingers trembling. The golden thread pulsed once, then dissolved. Behind them, the spirit bowed its head, and vanished. The rain stopped. Not gradually, not with a fading patter. It simply ceased, as if time had blinked. The hourglass stilled. The cracks in the archway sealed themselves with a soft crystalline hum. Draco turned to her, eyes wide, chest rising and falling. "It's over?" Hermione nodded, tears slipping free, despite herself. "The loop's broken. Not because I saved you, because I saw you." He stared at her for a long moment. Then slowly he reached out, not for his locket, not for his wand, but for her hand, and for the first time in any timeline she let him take it. The air in the room of requirement tasted of rust and old parchment, thick with the residue of unraveling worlds. Hermione stood at the center of a fractured circle, her fingers pressed to the cold stone floor, where glowing cracks pulsed like dying veins. They had followed the spirit's last whisper here, "Star, where time forgets itself, star." And now the walls flickered between stone and sky, revealing glimpses of impossible places, a snowy village under twin moons, a library burning in reverse, a version of Hogwarts with its towers leaning sideways like melting wax. Beside her, Draco exhaled sharply, his breath forming frost in the sudden chill. "It's happening again," he said, voice low. "I can feel it, the weight of something ending." She turned to him, her dark eyes reflecting the fractured light. "Not ending, collapsing. Every timeline that never was, every choice we didn't make, they're folding in on themselves." Her voice trembled, not from fear, but from the sheer magnitude of it. She had studied temporal theory, yes, but this was chaos made manifest. The equations in her mind shattered before she could complete them. A whisper slithered through the air, not words, but impressions, regret, longing. A child's laughter, cut short. The spirit had not appeared in hours, not since it led them to this room, but its presence lingered like a bruise on reality. Then the floor heaved. Hermione stumbled forward, catching herself against Draco's shoulder. He didn't pull away. Instead, his hand found her arm, steadying her as the world around them groaned. The ceiling split open, not with violence, but with sorrow, and through the rift poured a cascade of silver mist. It swirled, forming shapes, a girl with Hermione's eyes, but Draco's smirk, a boy with a lightning scar, who laughed like Ron, a woman in green robes who reached for Draco with tears in her gaze. "Their memories," Hermione breathed, "but not ours." "No," Draco said, his voice tight. "Ours if we'd chosen differently, if the war had ended another way, if we'd ever—" Their eyes met, unspoken, undeniable. The mist thickened, the air hummed, then screamed. A pulse of raw magic tore through the room, hurling them apart. Hermione hit the wall, her wand slipping from her grasp. When she looked up, Draco was on his knees, clutching his head, his lips moving in silent agony. "Draco." She crawled toward him, dodging a falling shard of time. A frozen moment of a duel that never happened, replaying in jagged fragments. "What is it? What do you see?" He raised his face, and her breath caught. His eyes, storm gray, always guarded, were now filled with centuries of grief. "I see her," he whispered. "The spirit, she's me, from a life that burned out, trying to save someone. Trying to save you." Hermione froze. "No, that's not possible. Isn't it?" He reached for her, fingers trembling. "She's not warning me about my death. She's showing me yours, over and over. In every timeline where I live, you don't." The room shuddered again. The walls began to dissolve, brick by brick, memory by memory. The door to the outside world flickered in and out of existence. "We can't stay here," she said, grasping his hand. "But if what you're saying is true, if the collapse is rewriting every possibility, then we have to choose. Not what was, or what might have been, but what is." He looked at her, really looked at her, as if seeing her for the first time outside of war, outside of bloodlines and expectations. "Then I choose this," he said quietly. "You, now." The words hummed between them, fragile and fierce. And as the last echoes of forgotten lies faded into silence, the room stilled. For a breath there was only them. Then the spirit appeared, translucent, weary, its face half hidden in shadow. It bowed its head, not in warning, but in acceptance. and the world held its breath. Rain lashed the shattered ruins of what had once been the astronomy tower, its jagged spire now snapped like a broken promise against the bruised sky. Lightning flickered not in the clouds, but in the air itself, cracks of fractured time splitting the night, bleeding ghostly after images of moments that never were. Hermione clung to the crumbling edge of a fallen stone balustrade, her fingers numb, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps. Around her the world flickered. Now she stood in a sun-drenched courtyard, students laughing. Now she was back in the storm, the wind screaming with voices that weren't quite human. Granger. Draco's voice cut through the chaos, raw and urgent. He was 10 feet away, braced against a column that shimmered in and out of existence. His sleeve was torn, blood streaking his forearm, but his eyes, pale and fierce, held hers like a lifeline. "Don't let go, whatever you do. Not even for a second." She nodded, teeth clenched. The spirit had warned them. Star the echoes collapse when the timelines bleed too close. Anchor to each other. The tether is real. It's the only thing that won't unravel. But it wasn't just the storm tearing at them. It was the weight of what they'd seen. Memories that weren't theirs. Lives half-lived. A version where Draco had died in the Room of Requirement. One where Hermione had vanished into time itself during the Battle of Hogwarts. A quiet cottage in the Highlands, the two of them older, laughing over tea, then gone, erased like smoke. A jagged rift split the ground between them. The stone beneath Hermione's feet groaned, tilting. She cried out as she slipped, one hand losing its grip. Her body skidded toward the fissure, a yawning mouth of swirling gray mist and fractured light. Instinctively, she threw out her hand. Draco lunged. His fingers closed around her wrist, just as the earth beneath him cracked. He grunted, thrown to one knee, but he didn't let go. Rain soaked his hair to his skull, his face taut with pain and effort. Hold on, I'm trying," she gasped, legs dangling over the void. The mist below pulsed, whispering her name in voices both familiar and alien. She could feel it, pulling, gnawing at the edges of her mind, trying to draw her into its hollow heart. "Don't listen," Draco said, voice low, fierce. "Look at me, only me." She forced her eyes up. His face was paler than usual, shadows under his eyes, but his grip was iron. "Why are you doing this?" she whispered, though she already knew the answer. The tether wasn't just magic, it was choice. It was trust. "Because you're the only thing that's felt real in weeks," he said, "and I'd rather go mad holding on to you than vanish into one of those cursed echoes." A thunderclap split the air, not sound, but sensation, a wave of temporal force that made the ruins shudder. The rift widened. More cracks spiderwebbed across the courtyard, swallowing fragments of stone, of time. "We can't stay here," Hermione said. "We have to move." Then we moved together. Draco braced himself, muscles straining as he pulled her up. She scrambled, finding purchase, and in one desperate motion, he hauled her to solid ground. They collapsed against each other, breathless, soaked, trembling. For a moment neither spoke. The storm raged, but the pull lessened. The echoes receded, folding back into the fabric of time, like waves retreating from shore. Hermione turned her head, her temple brushing his shoulder. "You were in one of them," she murmured. "The echo where I lived alone in that cottage. You came once, years later. You said you never stopped looking for me." Draco went very still, then softly, "And I meant it." She didn't know if it was true. She didn't know if it could be. But in that broken place, with time collapsing around them, it was enough. She reached for his hand. He took it, fingers interlacing, and together they stood. The silence after the spirit vanished was not empty, but thick with the weight of something completed. Moonlight, pale and steady, spilled through the broken stained glass of the forgotten astronomy tower, painting fractured constellations across the stone floor. Hermione stood frozen, her breath shallow, fingertips still tingling from where the ghostly hand had brushed her wrist. The air no longer hummed with fractured time. No echoes whispered from the walls. The oppressive cold that had clung to the edges of reality since the first sighting had lifted, replaced by the crisp, clean chill of a winter morning creeping over the horizon. Draco exhaled, a long, shuddering breath that seemed to release years of tension. He swayed slightly on his feet, then caught himself against the crumbling stone archway. His silver eyes, wide and unguarded, met hers. For a moment, there was no Malfoy's sneer, no guarded pride, only raw vulnerability, the kind that came from staring into the abyss and seeing your own name scorched into its depths. "It's gone," he said, voice low, rough with disbelief. "It's actually gone." Hermione nodded, unable to speak just yet. Her heart thrummed against her ribs like a trapped bird. She stepped forward, her boots crunching over fine glass and frost, and reached for him. Not to heal, his injuries had already begun to mend as the timeline corrected itself, but to anchor. Her fingers curled around his forearm, solid and warm, real in a way that made her throat tighten. "I felt it," he murmured, staring at the spot where the spirit had dissolved into light. When it let go, like something inside me that had been stretched too thin, finally snapped back into place. She looked down at her hands. The faint golden threads that had shimmered beneath her skin since the first vision, evidence of the temporal tether, had faded. The bond was severed. Or perhaps fulfilled. "It wasn't just warning us," she said slowly. "It was trying to remember, to live through us, through what we could have been." Draco turned to her, brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" She met his gaze. "That spirit, it wasn't just a fragment of time. It was a choice, a life where you didn't walk away in the room of requirement, where I didn't let you go, where we—" She hesitated. "Where we stayed." She's fraught where we stayed, evidenced of each other. "And in that life you died saving me." His breath caught. The wind stirred strands of his pale hair, and for the first time she saw sorrow in his eyes, not for himself, but for that other version of them. "And it brought us here, not just to save me," he said quietly, "but to give that version peace." She nodded. "By ensuring we survived. By letting us see what could have been, so we could choose what still can be." A soft light began to bleed across the eastern sky, pink and gold bleeding into grey. The castle awoke slowly, the distant cry of a rooster from Hagrid's, the faint creak of ancient wood settling. Time had righted itself. The fractures were sealed. Draco didn't let go of her hand. They stood there side by side, watching the dawn rise over the forbidden forest, over the lake, over a world that had almost unraveled and stitched itself back together around them. The weight of lost futures hung between them, tender and bittersweet, but so did something else, something that hadn't been there before. Not just survival, not just relief, trust, and the quiet, aching possibility of beginning. Rain tapped a slow rhythm against the leaded windows of the borrowed cottage, each drop like a whispered secret against the glass. The fire in the hearth had dwindled to embers, casting long, trembling shadows across the stone floor. Hermione sat curled in the armchair, a woolen blanket pooled around her legs, her fingers absently tracing the spine of an old water-stained journal. She wasn't reading, she was remembering. Draco lay on the sofa, one arm flung over his eyes, his breathing steady but not quite sleep. The lines of exhaustion still clung to his face, softer now than they had been a week ago, before the spirit first appeared in the ruins of the Department of Mysteries. Before the visions, before the echoes of lives they hadn't lived, began whispering in their dreams. "It's strange," he said, voice low, rough with disuse. "I keep waking up and expecting to see her, standing in the corner, the half-smile, like she knows something I don't." Hermione didn't need to ask who he meant. The spirit, neither fully ghost nor memory, but something caught between seconds, had visited them both in fragments. To Hermione, she appeared as a woman with silver eyes, and Hermione's own stubborn tilt of the chin. To Draco, she wore his mother's voice, but with a gaze that held centuries. "I dreamt of her again last night," Hermione murmured. "She was standing in the Great Hall, but it wasn't our Great Hall. The banners were different, green and silver, but not Slytherin green. Something older. She said, 'You were never meant to walk this path alone.'" Draco lowered his arm, turning his head toward her. "And what did you say?" "I didn't. I woke up," she exhaled, a small, trembling breath. "But when I did, I felt you. Not in the room, just near. Like a thread pulled taut." He didn't answer right away. Instead, he sat up slowly, wincing as his bruised ribs protested. The last confrontation had left its marks, on both of them. Not just the shallow cut across his temple or the burn on her forearm, but the deeper ones, the ones that didn't bleed but ached all the same. "We're not who we were," he said finally. "No," she agreed, her voice barely above a whisper. "We're not." There was no bitterness in it, no accusation. Just truth, laid bare between them like the scattered papers on the table. Maps of forgotten timelines, sketches of doors that shouldn't exist, notes in handwriting that sometimes wasn't theirs. He reached for the teacup on the side table, long gone cold. "Do you ever wonder if we're being led somewhere, or if we're being tested?" "Every day." She met his gaze. "But I think it's both. The spirit isn't just warning us about your death, Draco. She's showing us what could have been, what still could be." A gust of wind rattled the window pane. Outside, the rain had eased, leaving the world slick and quiet, as if holding its breath. "I used to think time was fixed," he said, "that choices were final, but now I feel like every step we take ripples backward and forward at once. Like we're standing in the middle of a mirror maze and every reflection is a different version of us." Hermione smiled faintly. "You've been reading my notes, only the ones written in your hand." He paused. "Most of the others, they're in mine, but the thoughts aren't. It's like someone else lived my life and left me the diary." She set the journal aside and rose, crossing the room to stand before the fire. The warmth brushed her skin, chasing away the chill that had settled deep in her bones since the last vision, the one where she'd seen Draco fall, not in battle, but in silence, alone in a corridor of white stone, his hand outstretched toward a door that wouldn't open. "I don't believe in fate," she said, "but I believe in us. In what we've built, this understanding, this trust." Draco watched her, the firelight catching the gray in his eyes, softening them. "Even after everything?" "Especially after everything." For a long moment, neither spoke. Then slowly he stood and walked to her. Not too close, just close enough to feel the same air, the same fragile peace. "If I'm meant to die," he said, "I don't want it to be without knowing what we could become." She turned to him, her breath catching. "Then we'll keep walking, through every broken memory, every ghost of a future, until we find the one where you don't have to." Outside, the clouds parted. A sliver of moonlight cut across the wet earth, illuminating the path that led into the woods, the same path the spirit had pointed to in their last vision. And for the first time, neither of them was afraid to follow. Rain tapped gently against the windows of the abandoned cottage on the edge of the forbidden forest, a steady rhythm that seemed to sync with the quiet rise and fall of Hermione's breath. The fire in the hearth had dwindled to embers, painting the room in flickering gold, shadows stretching like old memories across the stone walls. Draco sat across from her, one elbow propped on his knee, fingers loosely curled around a chipped teacup that had long gone cold. Neither spoke for a long while. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was full, heavy with things unnamed, yet understood. "I never thought I'd stand here," he said at last, voice low, almost reverent. "Alive, free, with this." Hermione looked up. His gray eyes met hers, not guarded as they once were, but open in a way that made her chest ache. She set her own cup aside and wrapped her hands around her knees. "With what?" "This," he repeated, gesturing faintly between them. "Whatever this is, not enemies. Not allies by necessity. Something else." She exhaled a small, breathy laugh. "It's terrifying, isn't it?" "Terrifying," he agreed, "but not unwelcome." Outside, a gust of wind sent a branch scraping against the glass, like a memory knocking at the door. They had spent weeks untangling the spirit's riddles, walking through echoes of lives they might have lived, seeing versions of themselves where one had died, the other had fallen, where love had bloomed too late or never at all. Each vision had carved something deeper into them, not scars, but understanding. And now the spirit was gone, dissolved into light the night they had chosen each other, not because of fate, but in defiance of it. "I used to think the future was a straight path," Hermione said, watching the embers shift. "One choice led to the next, like bricks on a road. But now, I see it as more like a tapestry, threads crossing, doubling back, fraying and mending. We've seen versions of ourselves that never were, people who loved too fiercely or not at all, people who ran or stayed. And the only constant, The only constant was us, Draco finished. She nodded. Not because we were meant to, but because we kept choosing to be. He leaned back, gaze drifting to the ceiling where cracks spiderwebbed like old wounds. I don't want to go back to the way things were. Not fully. I can't pretend my name doesn't carry weight, or that my family's past doesn't stain the ground I walk on. But I don't want to hide from it either. You don't have to, she said softly. You could use it. Redirect it. The Malfoy library. Those archives aren't just dark magic and pure blood nonsense. There's history there. Forgotten spells, lost treaties, magical theory the Ministry has ignored for centuries. You could open it. Not to the elite. To everyone. Draco turned to her, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. You think I could do that? I know you could, she said. That'd help. Research, outreach, curriculum, if you wanted. I've been thinking about teaching. Not Hogwarts. Not yet. Maybe a school for magical reform, ethics, reconciliation, bridging gaps between pure blood and muggle-born, centaur and wizard, house elf and master. A place where we don't just teach magic, but how to live with it. He smiled then, small, real, the kind that reached his eyes. You're going to change the world, Granger. I'd rather change it with someone, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The fire crackled. A log collapsed into ash. After a moment, Draco stood and crossed the room, settling beside her on the worn rug. Not too close. Just close enough that their shoulders brushed. I've spent so much of my life trying to outrun who I was, he said. Now for the first time I feel like I'm standing still, and it doesn't terrify me. Maybe that's the future, she said. Not something we chase, something we build. Together. He turned his hand, palm up, beside hers. She looked at it, then slowly, deliberately, laced her fingers through his. Outside, the rain softened. The wind stilled. And in the quiet of the cottage, two people who had walked through fire and time itself simply sat, breathing, choosing, again and again, the life they wanted to live. Lane tapped gently against the windowpane of the small cottage nestled in the highlands, a steady rhythm, like a heartbeat returning to normal after years of panic. Hermione stood barefoot on the wooden floor, steam rising from a chipped porcelain cup between her palms. Outside, the purple haze of heather-covered hills stretched into mist, untouched by spells or time. It had been 6 weeks since the final unraveling, the moment when the spirit, its voice fraying like old parchment, whispered, "It is done," and dissolved into motes of silver light. Draco sat by the fire, a book open in his lap, though he wasn't reading. His gaze drifted to the mantel, where a single shard of crystal rested, what remained of the time-glass they'd shattered to sever the loop. He hadn't spoken much since that night, not because he was angry or distant, but because some silences were too full to fill with words. She watched him from the corner of her eye, the way his fingers tapped once against the book's spine, the way his shoulders had finally lost that coiled tension, like a man who no longer expected the floor to vanish beneath him. They hadn't planned this quiet, this peace. They'd only known they couldn't return to the world the same way they'd left it, not after living 100 lives in fragments. Not after remembering versions of themselves that loved, hated, betrayed, and saved each other in endless permutations. I dreamt of her again last night, he said finally, voice low. Hermione turned. The spirit? He nodded. She didn't speak, just stood, at the edge of a forest, same one from the third vision. But this time, she was smiling. Or I think she was. It was faint, like moonlight on water. Hermione stepped closer, setting her cup down. Do you think she's still out there, in some echo? No, he said. I think she was never truly a spirit, not of the dead. More like a memory of what we almost were, a warning built from regret. She sat beside him, close enough that their shoulders touched. And now? Now, he said, turning to her. We write something new. The fire crackled. A log shifted, sending up a shower of amber sparks. In that glow, Hermione saw not the boy from Slytherin, not the man haunted by choices he didn't remember making, but Draco, whole present, his gray eyes soft, with something that hadn't existed in any of their fractured timelines. Trust, hope, something warmer. She reached for his hand, and he let her take it, their fingers interlacing like roots finding soil. They didn't speak for a long while. There was no need. The weight of what they'd survived hung between them, not as a burden, but as a bridge. Later, they walked. The rain had eased to a mist, and the air smelled of damp earth and pine. They followed a narrow path through the heather, one that hadn't been there before, new, unmarked. Hermione paused when she saw it. A small wooden sign half buried in moss, its letters barely legible. Star, undone Sith Star. The Fortress of Peace, she murmured. The Draco smirked. Fitting, she laughed. And the sound startled a flock of birds into flight above them. He looked at her then, not with the guarded curiosity of their school days, nor the wary alliance of their journey, but with a quiet awe, as if she were something he'd spent lifetimes trying to remember. "I used to think fate was a chain," he said, "something that dragged you forward, no matter how you fought. And now?" He squeezed her hand. "Now I think it's a path, and we're the ones who lay the stones." She leaned into him, and together they walked on, into the mist, into the unbroken path ahead, where every step was theirs alone to take.